begin our afternoon with the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee led by Mr. John Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm John Blackburn. I chair the Committee for Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools, and I'm joined in this work by my friend, Ms. Jill Campbell. And we have a fairly long agenda today, so you'll bear with me. So it's important work, and appreciate all of you all listening to what all we have. So action on first read today. You'll hear appeals. Two charter schools have appealed to the State Board of Education from the decision from the Charter Review Board. These two schools are Heritage Collegiate Leadership Academy and School of the Arts for Boys Academy, better known as Saba. The board chair convened a special panel to conduct the hearing for these appeals, and those persons that are on the appeal committee with me were Ms. Jill Camnitz and Mr. Reginald Keenan. So there are two appeals that you'll hear today. So I am going to, these are rather long, and forgive me, I'm going to read almost the full statement so you will have that data for you. Then I'll ask you that you can make questions of my fellow board members and Ms. Schaefer at that time, if you'd like to ask questions. So the first one that we heard was Heritage Collegiate Leadership Academy Wake. This matter is an appeal by Heritage Collegiate Leadership Academy from a decision of the Charter Schools Review Board to deny HCLA Wake a charter. It came on for hearing on November 27th, 2023, before the three-panel member you just heard about. I chaired that, and Ms. Camnitz and Mr. Keenan joined me. What follows is a summary of the factual background based upon information shared in the hearing and in the documents submitted by the parties for consideration. The panel was charged with making a recommended decision to the full board of the State Board of Education. The panel's recommended decision is found in the last part of this statement. The factual background. During the 2022 charter application cycle, the board for HCLA Wake submitted an application to open a charter school with a projected opening date of the fall of 2024. The application went through the regular process for review and consideration, which included an assessment by 3 external reviewers. At least one of the reviewers ranked the HCLA Wake application as not meeting expectations in each of the following areas: the educational plan, governance and capacity, and the financial plan. During the North Carolina Charter School Advisory, this was back in the old days when it was CSAB, interviews on November 8th, 2022, concerns and questions were raised by CSAP members about HCLA's follow-through in details, student interest, budget, alternative education and innovations, teacher salaries, bylaws, and facility. During the November 8th interview, there also was a discussion about the fact that Dr. Kashi Bazemore, HCLA's founder and head of schools, had been granted an earlier charter for an HCLA school in Bertie County. During the 2017-2018 academic year, the SBE ordered the Bertie school closed and the charter revoked for malfeasance and or misfeasance. That SBE action resulted in a settlement that allowed another party to assume the charter and operate the school, which became Three Rivers Academy. Dr. Bazemore was removed from any role with the school. At the November 8, 2022 interview with HCLA Wake, in response to a question about what would be different this time if a new charter were granted, Dr. Bazemore stated there were mistakes made, but they were learned from those mistakes. When asked to further explain, Dr. Bazemore stated that they have learned how to be in connection with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, DPI, staff, and they have a positive working relationship with the Office of Charter Schools, and that working well with the state is the #1
change that would be made. At a second interview on December 5th, 2022, CSAB members debated whether Dr. Bazemore, who is the proposed school leader and former leader of the closed HCLA Bertie, was prepared to operate another school. Despite some of the concerns expressed by the reviewers and the CSAB members, CSAB voted to recommend to the State Board of Education that the HCLA Wake application be approved. On January 5th, 2023, CSAP recommendation came before us, the State Board of Education, for action. The State Board of Education voted not to approve HCLA's Wake application. The existing law at the time required CSAP take up the application on reconsideration, which it did at its February 2023 meeting, and it again voted to recommend approval to the State Board of Education. At its meeting on March 2nd, 2023, the State Board of Education again voted to deny HCLA Wake and charter. Ms. Amy White, then a member of the State Board of Education and chair of the State Board of Education's EICS committee, shared the following statement in support of her recommendation and motion to the State Board of Education that HCLA Wake be denied a charter. Ms. White's statement is, and I quote, "In January of 2014, Heritage Collegiate Leadership Academy was granted a charter to operate a charter school in Bertie County. The school opened in the fall of 2014. Throughout the operation of HCLA Bertie, the HCLA Board and Administration demonstrated difficulties with fulfilling the terms of its charter. Following a long history of warnings for poor student performance, qualifying the school as a continually low-performing school, failure to comply with fiscal requirements, including failure to file required reports and audits, failure to have the required percentage of certified teachers on its staff, failure to have the required number of members for the governing nonprofit board, non-compliance with federal exceptional children's service and documentation requirements, and other violations of state and federal laws and or its charter." CSAP recommended, and on November 2nd, 2017, the State Board of Education approved revocation of HCLA's Bertie charter for all of those reasons. Subsequent to the State Board's revocation vote in November of 2017, HCLA Bertie asked for and was granted an opportunity for the decision to be considered for a review panel consistent with the terms of its charter. That panel rendered a decision on December 6, 2017, finding that the evidence presented supported the termination recommended by CSAP and the vote to terminate by the State Board of Education. The December 6, 2017 written decision by the review panel sets out in great detail and findings of fact that supported the decision to terminate HCLA Bertie. That letter is part of the public record and of the specific record in the application matter we are considering today. It's been shared with the State Board of Education members as part of the consideration of the vote we must take. Dr. Kashi Bazemore Hall was the executive director of HCLA Bertie during the 4 years that it operated. Excuse me. She was directly responsible for the school's many failures to comply with state and federal legal requirements, the charter requirements, the directives of the Office of Charter Schools, DPI School Business Office, and the violation of the rights of students at the school to receive a sound basic education. After the failure of the prior HCLA school, we have now before us the application for a new HCLA school with the same individual. Dr. Kashi Bazemore Hall is the proposed chairman of the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors of a charter school is responsible under state law for overseeing and guaranteeing the legal compliance and success of the school. Dr. Bazemore Hall demonstrated quite dramatically when she ran HCLA Bertie from the fall of 2014 to the summer of 2018 that she was unable to properly run a successful school. to the point where the school's charter had to be revoked for malfeasance. I believe it would be fiscally and morally irresponsible on the part of the State Board of Education to grant Dr. Bazemore Hall's organization another charter, given her past failures as a school leader. I cannot recommend to this board that we approve HCLA Raleigh with the same leadership in place. End of quote. In August 16th, 2023, the North Carolina General Assembly passed a law that permitted any applicant or charter school that had an application submitted on or after July 1st, 2022, that the CSAB recommended be decided in the applicant or charter school's favor, and that the State Board of Education then subsequently rejected that recommendation to apply for the decision to be reconsidered by the new Charter School Review Board, CSRB. HCLA Wake notified the Office of Charter Schools of its intent to apply for reconsideration to the Charter School Review Board. HCLA requested a reconsideration, was heard and considered by the CSRB on October 18th, 2023. After discussion and deliberation, CSRB voted not to approve HCLA Wake's application. This denial entitled HCLA Wake to request an appeal to the SBE. In reviewing the appeal, the SBE is to conduct a de novo review of the the Charter Review Board's decision. On November 27th, 2023, this matter was heard by the three-member panel that you just heard of the State Board, and was charged with making a recommendation to you as the full board. At that meeting, the panel voted unanimously to recommend to the State Board of Education that it uphold the decision of the Charter Review Board that the HCLA Wake charter application not be approved. Here are the following panel conclusions and recommendations. The approval of a charter school rests within the sound discretion of the Charter School Review Board, or if denied and appealed by the State Board of Education. There is no legal responsibility no legal entitlement to the charter. It is up to the applicant to convince the approving authority that it can run an effective charter school. The conclusion to deny HCLA Wake a charter was reached by the Charter Review Board after much consideration and supported by the evidence in the record that was presented to the State Board of Education panel, and which has now been provided to the full board prior to this meeting, the December 2023 State Board meeting. The record demonstrates significant concerns with the HCLA Wake application, concerns that are articulated by outside reviewers, the Charter Review Board members and State Board of Education members. The record clearly justifies the Charter Review Board's and the State Board panel's conclusion that given the totality of circumstances, it is reasonable and appropriate to conclude that HCLA Wake application should be denied. There has been much discussion during these many processes about the previous HCLA Bertie School operated by Dr. Bazemore, which was ordered closed during the 2017-2018 school year. It is not only legally permissible, but part of the duty of the Charter School Review Board to consider Dr. Bazemore's past malfeasance as the school director and request her to articulate that it would be different if she were awarded another charter. Dr. Bazemore Hall has failed to convince both the Charter Review Board and the State Board panel that her performance would be any better if given another school to operate. Better communication with the Office of Charter Schools is not enough to assure the panel that she has identified, articulated, and is able to comply with the requirements of operating a charter school. It is the obligation of the Charter Review Board and the State Board of Education to ensure that approved charter schools have a significant likelihood of successfully operating and educating students. The panel cannot conclude that the proposed HCLA weight has a likelihood of success. Therefore, the Charter School Appeals Panel of the State Board of Education respectfully recommends to the full State Board of Education that the State Board deny the charter application of the HCLA weight application. So I will now open the floor. If there are any questions from my fellow board members, feel free to ask myself or Ms. Kamnitz, Mr. Keenan, or Ms. Schaefer. Hearing no questions, you've heard the recommendation and we'll present that tomorrow. Thank you. The second appeal that was heard, this came before us. Excuse me, let me get caught up here just a bit. Second appeal was to the State Board of Education Charter Review Panel from the School of the Art for Boys Academy. This matter is an appeal by the School of the Arts for Boys Academy, Saba, from a decision of the Charter School Review Board, CSRB, to revoke Saba's charter. This appeal came on for hearing on November 29th, 2023, and December 4th, 2023, before the forenamed three-member panel of the State Board of Education. Those are myself, Ms. Jill Kamnitz, and Mr. Reginald Keenan. The following is a summary of the factual background based upon information shared in the hearing and in the documents submitted by the parties for consideration, as well as the panel's conclusions and recommendations to the full board of the State Board of Education. Factual background. Saba applied to become a North Carolina charter school in 2020 with a projected opening date of fall of 2021. On February 4th, 2021, the State Board of Education approved the application and Saba's board entered the mandatory Ready to Open process implemented by the Office of Charter Schools, OCS. On June 3rd, 2022, the Saba board received approval to delay its opening to the fall of 2023. North Carolina law requires a minimum enrollment of at least 80 students for all charter schools unless the school can supply a compelling reason for serving fewer students in their charter application. During the RTO Ready to Open process, the Saba board requested and received amendments to enrollment and for relocation. However, the Saba application submitted in 2020 did not contain a request to serve fewer than 80 students, nor did any amendment requests made during the RTO Ready to Open period contain a request to serve fewer than 80 students. On July 1st, 2023, Saba received its 5-year charter agreement following the completion of Ready to Open. By signing the charter agreement, the Saba board agreed to be accountable for purposes of ensuring compliance with applicable laws and provisions of its charter. This agreement includes enrollment of students as prescribed by law, which requires a minimum of 80 enrolled students. On August 10th, 2023, the Office of Charter Schools sent a letter to Saba indicating concerns over the enrollment numbers provided to the office. In the letter, the Office of Charter Schools Director, Ms. Ashley Beccaro, reiterated 3 options she had previously provided should the Saba board agree with the enrollment concerns. Number 1, give up their charter. Number 2, request another delay to open the school. Or number 3, have the Saba board vote to push back the calendar to continue their enrollment efforts. In the same letter, Saba was advised that if their enrollment was below 80 students, that they would be placed on non-compliance status, their allotments would drop, and there would be an impact on funding since Saba projected their enrollment as 116 students. The Saba board chose to continue forward, and Saba opened its doors to students on August 28th of 2023. On October 10th, 2023, Saba was placed on non-compliance status by the school division for the Department of Public Instruction for Saba's enrollment being reported at 49 students. Saba's board and school leadership were asked to appear before the Charter Review Board at its regular meeting on October 17, 2023, to present and address the low enrollment. During the October 17th Charter Review meeting, Valencia Toomer, Saba's head of school, stated they had currently had 53 students enrolled. The Charter Review Board was presented with data with the school business showing that Saba had an enrollment of 48 based on month 1 average daily membership. Saba projected an enrollment of 116. Because the first allotment was based on the projection of 116 students, further allotments were to be based on the actual ADM of 48, which left the school with a balance of $151,337.38, which was 49% of the total state allotment for the year, which meant that the school had spent 51% of its state allotment in the first 2 months of the 9-month school year. The Charter Review Board asked Saba how it would survive fiscally with the remaining funds. Ms. Toomer stated that a daycare would be started and that the school would engage in fundraising. Concerns were raised that a third of the projected budget would be coming from a daycare that did not exist yet. The Charter Review Board possesses statutory authority to terminate a charter, in part when a charter school fails to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management or violation of law or a material violation of any of the conditions, standards, or procedures set forth in the charter. Following discussion among Charter Review Board members, the Charter Review Board voted to terminate Saba's charter effective December 31st, 2023, due to the school's failure to meet the statutory minimum enrollment and failure to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management. Saba appealed this decision to the State Board of Education for a de novo review. On November 29, 2023, the aforementioned 3-member panel of the State Board of Education heard this appeal. During the hearing, there were questions raised about whether Saba was financially able to stay open through the end of the academic year. The hearing was recessed to December 4, 2023, and Saba was requested to submit any additional documentation by 5 p.m. on December 1st, 2023, to prove that they had the financial ability to operate through the end of the current academic year. Saba complied with this directive and submitted financial documentation to the panel. On December 4th, 2023, the hearing was brought back to order. Following additional brief presentations and discussions, the panel expressed concerns that it was unable to determine that Saba's financial condition was such that it would operate effectively for the remainder of the school year. Consequently, the panel voted unanimously to recommend to the full State Board of Education that it uphold the decision of the Charter Review Board to terminate Saba's charter effective December 31st, 2023. The following are the conclusions and the recommendation. Based on the record before this panel, Saba does not meet the statutory required number of students to be served by a charter school. Saba did not seek to amend their application to include an exception to the enrollment requirement. Thus, the panel concluded that it was permissible for the Charter Review Board to terminate Saba's charter for violation of their duties. Additionally, this panel concluded that termination was warranted due to Saba's failure to meet generally accepted standards of fiscal management. Specifically, Saba spent 51% of its state allotment in the first 2 months of the operation. While Saba submitted documentation in an attempt To support its viability to remain open through the end of the academic year and suggested possible alternative funding sources, this panel was not convinced that the school will be able to remain financially viable. The conclusion to terminate Saba's charter is supported by the evidence in the record that was presented to the school board panel, which was also provided to the full State Board of Education prior to this meeting. Therefore, the Charter School Appeals Panel of the State Board of Education respectfully recommends to the full State Board of Education that the State Board uphold the Charter Review Board's decision to terminate Saba's charter. I respectfully submit this to you for a vote for tomorrow. I will now open the floor for any questions of myself or my two fellow panel members and to Ms. Schaefer. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to point out that several of us have received a number of emails from advocates, parents, grandparents, that sort of thing about the school. I do hope that they are listening to the conversation that we are having today so that they'll have an understanding of everything that the state board is considering in the process, as well as what they're feeling about their children, community members, et cetera, in the school.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
About, I'm sorry, a quick question about the law itself. Is the right to appeal unconditional to appeal to the state board?
So refer to legal counsel.
The law states that the Charter Review Board makes a decision on applications and on revocations, and if either the state superintendent or the school wishes to appeal, they have a right to appeal to the state board for a de novo review by the state board. That's what's before you today, an appeal by the school from the decision of the review board. So if it's a decision that the school or the superintendent disagrees with, either of them have a complete right to appeal those decisions on the actions that the review board is delegated, which include revocations and application.
Thank you.
Dr. Oxendine, this is a new process for all of us. It was put in place by the legislature. So.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah,
I
you
just
got it.
wondered about any conditions about the right to, so there are none. They have that automatic right to.
Yes, yes. Dr. Hall.
Thank you, sir. And just for clarity on my part, the decision that's being recommended is based upon financial issues and enrollment. And the expenditure of 51% of the funds for the first 9 months of school.
First 2 months of school.
First 2 months of school.
First 2 months of school.
I missed that there.
So they opened in August. They opened in August 28th, and they've already spent 51% of their months at the November when Office of Charter Schools said
And they received that funding based on 116
116.
students. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone else want to make a comment?
Know that I should say this or not,
No
but
problem at all.
I just would like to assure everyone that, that the three of us in hearing this were very mindful that this was a special population of children that the school was trying to serve. And I don't think any of us had any real concerns about what was being offered to the students and the families. However, we couldn't overcome the problems, both financial and enrollment-wise.
And to your question, that's the reason we were very mindful, thought carried over to a second day of consideration. So, thank you for your questions, and those are the recommendations, and you'll hear those tomorrow. All right, so the next one, the EICS 2 is report to the General Assembly on transition planning for residential schools. So, Dr. Jordan and his team have 30 seconds. No, I'm sorry, you have as much time as you need.
You say 3 hours? So,
3 hours, you got it.
thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Good afternoon, Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, board members and advisors. As you know, Session Law 2023-10, also referred to as House Bill 11 for this, became law April 3rd, 2023. As such, effective July 1, 2024, the state's 3 residential schools for the deaf and blind will be governed by separate, independent boards of trustees. The Department of Public Instruction was directed to develop a plan to help facilitate a smooth transition. In addition, the department has been directed, next slide please, has been directed to submit 3 interim reports. You see the dates there. We have submitted 1 such report, and today the second report includes input from 10 units within the department. I hope that you'll find that it's comprehensive and provides the information requested by the legislature. Throughout this process, which has absolutely been complex, we have continued working to identify needs and challenges and problem solve those needs and challenges. We've responded to a number of questions. We have solidified some timelines, and of course there are others to be solidified. We've communicated with stakeholders, and we are otherwise preparing for the new governance structure. Since the first report, all trustees have been appointed, and as you know, this board appointed 1 member for each of the boards. The temporary admission criteria also was approved by this board. Staff examined costs and services provided by the Department of Public Instruction in support of the residential schools and identified potential gaps and needs in that same vein. We reviewed with our legal team salary and employment considerations and the current administrative structures at the 3 schools. We're excited that we've also collaborated with the North Carolina School Boards Association to provide training for the boards of trustees as required by the statute. And the training is required, not the collaboration. And they will also provide model policies for the boards to consider. Lastly, this undertaking, as I noted, has been monumental, and so the 3 school directors graciously helped identify funding to establish a temporary part-time project manager. Dr. Chip Buckwell was hired into that position, and he is helping us to review and revise our plan and track progress towards the eventual transition. With me today are the 3 school directors, as well as Dr. Laurie Morrow, who has been serving in a part-time temporary position and providing direct support in consultation with me to the 3 school directors. She's going to come forward and walk you through the personnel considerations.
Thank you, Dr. Jordan. Chairman Davis, Superintendent Truitt, board members, colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here with you. As Dr. Jordan said, this has been a collaborative effort, and as we have looked at the considerations in preparing this report for the General Assembly, we felt that it was very important that we collaborated with all of the units that support the 3 residential schools in the department. And so through that collaboration, along with input from the 3 residential directors, myself, Dr. Jordan, and now Dr. Buckwell on our team, we have identified some areas of support. We've identified some personnel considerations and some additional services that we have acknowledged that these schools are going to need post-transition. You'll see that in this chart we have organized the personnel considerations by areas. If you look at under Human Resources, currently the Human Resources Department here at DPI provides support for the residential schools in areas such as employee relations, recruitment, helping with salary scales. And as we move forward to the transition, we have come to be understanding that currently they have a HR manager on staff, and we are proposing that that position be reclassified and move up to the director level, because this is going to require some significant HR skills and abilities to support the schools post-transition. We also know that they're going to need continued support in the HR technician area. Right now, Eastern and NCSD currently have HR technicians. Governor Moorhead does not. So you can see illustrated on your chart, we have 1 to 2 technicians, and we're proposing that these technicians be allocated to support the schools again, to make sure all of these HR functions are running in the school and that they have the support that they need as they move away post-transition. Moving on to school planning. We have engaged our friends in school planning and talked about the market rate and thinking about all of the construction work, whether it's pre-construction all the way to construction. Right now, the schools have collectively 25 different projects going on. So as we seek support for them, we are looking at engaging additional architectural and engineering support. And you can see the numbers there. The salary is outlined anywhere from $270,000 to $300,000 per year, and that's based on the calculation of the 1,200 hours per year that has been provided of support to the schools. Moving on to the area of technology, certainly this is an area that as the schools come into their own, they're going to need additional support as they get their systems up and running, as they have security issues, as they are working through monitoring and all of those. And we're recommending that a technology specialist per school be in place, and you can see that salary there at $125,000. And keep in mind, these salaries are coming to us from OSHR and from the Office of Human Resources as we look at these positions. Moving on to school finance, this school business, this is a complex area, as we know, and this is an area where the school directors and I and Dr. Jordan felt it very important that we maintain segregation of duties in some areas. And so we're proposing that an accounting technician be added. This person will be in charge of payroll and all things accounting. And then you see the .3 for an accounting manager 1, a budget analyst, and a procurement specialist, and the appropriate salary costs beside those. We're going to need that accounting manager 1 position to help with cash management, to help with approvals, transactions. We're going to need the budget analyst to help with certifying the budget. We're going to need the procurement specialist to help with the purchases, to negotiate contracts, and to look after fixed assets. And we're thinking that potentially these costs could be shared up among the 3 schools if need be. And then finally, as we look at legal support that is needed for personnel considerations, we again have used the market rate, and our legal team has estimated that about 2,000 hours have gone in annually to supporting the residential schools. And so we've broken the support needed by the partner billing hour, by the associate billing hour, and the work that paralegals may need. You can see that this is quite an extensive list, but again, as we're setting these schools up for success and as we're moving them post-transition, we want to advocate for as much as they need to make sure that they're successful and they can continue to do business on July 1 when they transition.
Session law also required us to make additional recommendations, and those recommendations are before you today. We recommend the continued use of HR and school business systems. NeoGov is what we use to help manage the HR processes, Fiori, NCAS, et cetera. Consider creating a central office to support all 3 schools, as partial positions may be hard to staff, retain, and manage. Now, This is not a popular approach and certainly not a preferred approach when you consider the geography, the fact that you have a school in the west, a school in the east, and then a school here in Raleigh. But we felt it necessary to at least offer some possibility in sending this recommendation over. But we fully acknowledge that the idea of unifying the services under one central office could be problematic. Provide adequate funding to maintain state salary scales and salary supplements. You will recall that the legislature recently allocated some funding to allow the schools to adjust their supplements so that their salaries could be more competitive. And certainly if that is a continued goal, they'll need funding to do that. Also, if they were to move under the state board's approved salary schedules for classified employees, they'll need funding to ensure that there are five-year increments built within the schedules. We also recommend that some consideration be given to the possibility of local funding for these schools, similar to the way that charters and lab schools receive local funding. Currently, these schools do not receive any local funding when students are enrolled. Also think, and you heard Dr. Morrow talk about the finance piece in particular, we think that it might be worthwhile to explore options to provide segregation of professional duties as a part of these internal controls, opportunities to exempt them from OSHR, OSBM, all of our other partners in governmental operations. We think it may be worthwhile to identify if any of the current requirements might benefit them through a waiver. Authorize funding for an advocacy position to assist the residential schools with identifying and submitting legislative requests. That is currently built into the department's process. The superintendent has made our residential schools a priority, and we have absolutely appreciated the advocacy on behalf of the residential schools through the Legislative Affairs Office. Lastly, explore an MOU or MOA among the three schools to enable them to remain one school food authority under the CEP, Community Eligibility Program. This will provide free breakfast and lunch for the next 3 years. It was very clear in our conversations with our school nutrition partners that this is an important necessity for these schools. We have each of the school directors present today, and we're going to give them just a few seconds to, one, introduce themselves, to kind of highlight the initial meetings of their boards of trustees, their respective board of trustees, talk about the admissions process that, again, this board has already approved, and provide any summary comments. We'll begin with Dr. Michelle Hanley, School Director for the Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to update you. Thank you, Dr. Jordan, for having us up. I was told I have 60 seconds, so I'll just share with you all that the ENCSD's Board of Trustees did have their first meeting on November 1st. All members were present. They also had the second meeting just Monday. The admissions process for the ENCSD that was established based on the policy that you all adopted for us has been launched, and we have given out 16 applications already. Our trustees will be attending the board training that Dr. Jordan mentioned. That's next week on Thursday and Friday. And then I'll just tell you how excited the board is to begin work for the school over in the East, and how we are all looking forward to what we'll be able to accomplish. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Superintendent Truitt, board members. Thank you, Dr. Jordan, Dr. Morrow, for the opportunity to present. My name is Melvin Diggs. I am the school director for the Governor Moorhead School for the Blind here in Raleigh. Governor Moorhead, too, has formulated its board based on the appointments that were given. We had our first meeting on October the 18th. Went very well. Engaged in conversation about planning and calendaring for the next appropriate through this year and into next year. We also talked about the reflection of the new admissions policy. If you'll look on our website, we've already had everything reviewed as far as the criteria and the procedures were concerned through DPI Legal. And so now our website reflects those changes. We have students in the pipeline as well that we're already considering through the new process. And then also, as just far as a summary of comments, we're really looking forward to the opportunities to provide you additional feedback that's in concert with the JLOC report that's already been done locally, and our Board of Trustees are diligently working to make sure that report is done in an appropriate manner and gets submitted in a timely fashion. Thank you.
And good afternoon to everyone, and also thank you for all of you for having us here today. My name is Mark Patrick. I am the school director for the North Carolina School for the Deaf in Morganton. And I too echo my peers where our first and second Board of Trustees meetings have already occurred. And throughout those, they were able to make chair and vice chair decisions. And they are currently working on some subcommittee opportunities and are hopeful to be able to hit the ground running quite vigorously. North Carolina School for the Deaf also is using our approved admissions committee documents that we had support with getting verified through the Department of Public Instruction, and we have 4 families running through those currently. So we are hopeful that that process will be seamless and will not allow for any holes, and allow the schools to be able to admit students that truly can benefit from our program. And then finally, for the North Carolina School for the Deaf, our board members are also going to be, 100% of our board members are going to be attending the training next week with the School Board Association, and I'm quite grateful for that. And I do hope that through that opportunity, the training will provide some much needed guidance to our board. Our board does not have a lot of vesting, so I'm hopeful that that will help establish some roles and responsibilities for our board members. Thank you so much.
As you can imagine, the work thus far and the work thus far has required countless hours. It has been extremely nuanced, and the work ahead will be equally nuanced and will require equally as many, if not more, hours. I want to thank my DPI colleagues and these 3 school directors for their collaboration thus far. We are all fully committed to ensuring that we have the smoothest transition possible for the benefit of our students served on those campuses. At this time, we are ready for questions that you may have, either for me or any of the other presenters.
Before we open it to questions, Dr. Jordan, if I could make a comment. Number one, I'd like to thank you and all your folks at DPI for your extremely hard work to get this work done, and to the directors of these schools and their trustees, please thank them and thank you for your hard work. This is really important work. So I want to thank everyone that has done this. So it is actually on first read, so my fellow board members, you have some time to look over the information, and you're certainly welcome to ask questions today, but then you can ask questions at our January meeting as well. So, any questions?
I just wanted to thank Dr. Jordan. Derek, I know this has been a labor of love for you, and I have the privilege of having a front row seat to watch all of this unfold, and I know how hard you've worked on this, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Just check, I understood this is the national first read, so it won't come back in January.
Oh, sorry,
was gonna-
I'm sorry. I'm corrected, so it's actually on first read. We need this done.
And then I guess the other question I had was, are we being asked to receive this report, or are we being asked to approve this report?
So that's a really good question, and I'll defer. I will say that this really is a report from the Department of Public Instruction, but we were advised of the board's interest in making sure that we put all of the information out front and center and give you an opportunity to weigh in if necessary. So that's a good question. I don't know that it necessarily requires any action of the board.
Vice Chair Duncan, you're correct. It's, the action is to receive.
That's what I thought it was, is that we, as you have very well done, and as your colleagues have assisted in doing, given a great presentation of the hard work that's gone into this, but in terms of the recommendations, we're being asked to receive it, but not necessarily to approve those recommendations.
Right.
Sorry.
So I will vote happily to receive it.
Absolutely. Thank you. We
If
appreciate
I was
that.
being asked to vote for something else, I'd have more comments, but
Sure.
I'll save those.
Any other questions?
I didn't have a question, I did have a comment.
Please.
On my briefly. I am not familiar with, all three schools, but I am with North Carolina School for the Deaf in Wilson. And I understand they have Gary Farmer involved. And with him being involved, and I know, you know, Mr. Jones and some others, they're in good hands. That, they're the upper crust to me. So that's a fine group to have there.
Thank you. And just a small correction, that's the Eastern North Carolina School for the
North
Deaf.
Carolina School for the Deaf, thank you.
And you're welcome, and Mr. Farmer is a part. He has taught there, been very active since his retirement, and he is this board's appointee to the Board of Trustees.
Yes, ma'am.
Just very quickly, again, thank you for the work in bringing the legislation to fruition. On the slide with the reports that are required to be given to the Joint Legislative PSC,
Yes.
is that March 15th, 2024?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Just making sure.
Absolutely.
School teacher.
It's just like a dissertation, no matter how many times you review it.
Chair Davis.
Yeah, Dr. Jordan, I add my thanks to my colleagues and superintendents. Perhaps there hadn't been time for this, but have these recommendations been discussed with the three boards of trustees? Have they opined on these?
They are current.
So I'll ask Dr. Hanley first, and certainly any of the other directors can feel free. We did provide a draft copy of this to the board chairs for dissemination among their membership.
Yes, in House Bill 11, it makes the same request of the three boards as from the DPI. It put forth 4 questions to be answered in these interim reports. This is the first board report that is being asked for, and so what we've been asked to do is actually take the DPI's report and respond to that as question number 1, and then questions 2, 3, and 4 are the same. So when we met on Monday, that was the main task, and the agenda item of the meeting was to review the report that DPI provided for report number 2 for JLOC, and to either agree or have a different recommendation in terms of some of the items that were shared with you today, and then also to independently answer some of the items that were shared with you today, comparing benefits between being a GS 126 employee or a 115C employee and some of those types of issues. Our report is almost finalized and ready to submit. Sorry, got a head cold today.
And as far as Governor Moorhead is concerned, similar process. The DPI report has been turned over to our Board of Trustees. They are looking at those recommendations and are setting in place right now to make recommendations inherent to the information that's already been shared with you today. So we will have a school level report based from the Board of Trustees that will come to you with those considerations.
And I also echo Mr. Diggs in that, per Dr. Morrow, I submitted a school level report from the school director and did submit that to our Board of Trustee members. And I was told by our chair that they would take that information under advisement.
Thanks. So then, Dr. Jordan, I assume then we would get a follow-up report from you on the results of those trustees.
So we're happy to certainly share the information that comes as a result of the Boards of Trustees recommendations. Happy to share.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Vice Chair Duncan.
In light of the fact that there's a lot of this work represents a reset of what the relationships are, how would you describe, as your understanding as you work with the schools through this process, what the state board's role is at this point with respect to these schools?
So I believe, and I think it's explicitly indicated, that the state board's relationship with these schools will be similar to its relationship with any other public school unit, except it is still the state board's responsibility to establish the catchment areas for enrollment when it comes to the schools for the deaf, because there are 2 schools for the deaf, and so making sure that there is an appropriate catchment area for those schools remains the primary responsibility of this board. You approve the admissions criteria, but those rules or that policy was an interim policy, and so effective July 1, the local boards of trustees will be able to enact their own policies, including a new admissions policy if they so choose.
So to the extent that admissions policy, and I think everyone on this board will recall and acknowledge the admissions issues were quite significant in terms of trying to work through this process. If there are differences in the admission process than what the board policy set out after a great deal of work by the department on that policy, would that come back to the board so the board would have an opportunity to at least at a minimum review it?
So it would this year, and because again, that policy is only applicable for the current school year, and all of the procedures related to the approved policy have been vetted by our general counsel's office. So after June 30th, the board will not have, as I understand it, and I'll defer to counsel, as I understand it, the admissions policy beyond June 30th, 2024 will be under the authority of each board of trustees.
So for example, if the admissions policies of the individual boards conflict in some way, what is the, and I raise this because this admissions policy has been a very,
Absolutely.
It's been a very serious issue. So exactly how then would that be dealt with? Because that also affects all the other LEAs in the state with respect to the admissions, not just these schools.
So I'll definitely defer to my legal friends, but I'll just make one comment and say that certainly through the session law, the legislature's intent was to ensure that these schools operated as closely in alignment as possible. But to your point, Vice Chair Duncan, I think there is some room absolutely for there to be some different discrete policies for each campus.
And I would add, hopefully not, but just I'm asking the questions.
just to speak to the admissions question, so the way that the new statute is written is that it sets forth, excuse me, restrictions on what needs to be included in those admissions criteria. So the boards of the directors for the individual institutions will set those policies starting July 1st of next year. So the state board was directed to adopt an interim policy, as Dr. Jordan mentioned, for this year, but the boards of trustees will take those over. So whatever policies they adopt effective July 1st of 2024 will replace what the board approved earlier this year. Now, there are restrictions in the statute about what has to be included in those policies that are more or less identical to the restrictions that are governing the interim policy. So certain considerations for the student that have to be taken, certain factors that have to be taken into consideration as part of the admissions process, but to the extent that they don't conflict with that, the individual boards can modify those policies. I will note that under the changes to the statute, the state board does retain some residual rulemaking authority over the schools. We'd have to look at that in a little bit more detail to determine whether the state board could impose some universal restrictions, but that would have to go through the usual rulemaking process through the Administrative Procedures Act.
So it has been our position as your council that the new policies the new boards do not have any authority to adopt or enact policies until after July 1, 2024. They may work on them, develop ideas, but they don't have any authority to adopt any effective policies until after that date.
Dr. Oxenine, do you have a question?
I guess I had a thought that finally came out. So my question has to do with, is there any reason to think that the individual boards would not approve the interim guidelines that we've established?
So they do not have any authority to do anything with the interim policy this year.
Right.
But you're talking about subsequently.
Right.
I hesitate to say what they may or may not see as in keeping with their vision.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to again reiterate, thank you so much for the pats on the back, but boy, this has been a labor of love that has involved a lot of people. And so I am looking forward to our continued work forward.
Thank you again, Dr. Jordan. We appreciate you so much and appreciate everyone that worked on this project. So we know it was a heavy lift that was sort of added at the last minute. So, but that's what we do at DPI. We take on what's given to us and we make good decisions. So thank you. Action item EICS 3. Last month we got a report to the General Assembly from Dr. Murphy regarding the virtual schools, virtual public schools. And it was a little bit, we had a little technology issues in Greenville, but I just wanted to make sure everyone had seen that report and was willing to look at it and celebrate all the good things that were in that report. It was really a great report, and I wanted to lift up Dr. Murphy and Dr. Oates for their work on this. So we'll receive the report tomorrow for action, so that's EICS 3. Are there any questions regarding that? Hearing none, we'll move forward. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Bruce Friend, my friend, Chair of the Charter Schools Review Board, to bring us an update from Charter Review Board, and you with Dr. Eldridge is here too, so there we are. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. Thank you, Eric, Mr. Davis, Superintendent Truitt, for having us here today. Joined here again with John Eldridge, Vice Chair of the Charter School Review Board. It's the second time we've been before you. I guess I want to start by saying you're having John and I here today, but we're just 2 of 11 people who make up the Charter School Review Board. And so we have the honor of representing that board. Just so you know a little bit maybe more about us, because again, we are sort of somewhat of a new entity. There are 11 members of the Charter School Review Board. Of those 11, 9 of us have experience, firsthand experience in even launching or currently operating, such as John and I do, quality charter schools here in North Carolina. 2 of our members have exceptional expertise in things such as real estate, business, and economic development. And many of us who are on the Charter School Review Board, myself included, have actually served on school boards. And so I share all of that why. I just want to make sure you're aware of the tremendous amount of expertise that we bring to the table. We're all volunteers to do this work and are committed to making sure that we maintain and meet that mission of the Charter School Review Board, which is to ensure high-quality charter schools in the state of North Carolina. Those of us who serve in this board, we have a vested interest that we only have high-quality charter schools in North Carolina, and that's the work that we try to do each and every month. So with that, we're going to do a very quick update. If the slide deck's up there, you just want to speak to it. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Eldridge. He's going to share a little bit about the work of the board from our meetings in earlier November.
Thank you, Bruce. So we have had, just as a recent meeting, November 6th and 7th was our last meeting. Our upcoming meeting is, of course, next week, the 11th and 12th. And I want to just recap a few things that we did business-wise in the November meeting. We approved a reduction request from Movement Freedom. They asked and we approved them to focus only on K-5 schools and to phase out their existing middle school program at that school. We approved 2 more movement applications, Movement School Gastonia, Movement School Greensboro. And then we have begun the renewal process. There are 17 schools this year. They're up for renewal. The first ones that we did, the first 8, were the schools that have been placed on recommendation for either non-renewal or a 3-year renewal. And we will continue with the next group at our December 11th and 12th meeting. That's my report.
Yeah. And then lastly, we have the slide deck for you. A quick summary of the new applications. The process for new applicants for 23-24 is almost up. We had a total, as a reminder, of 15 applicants who expressed interest in launching a charter school. 3 of those applicants withdrew before the CSRB even heard from them. 6 of those applicants have received second interviews. We meet next week and we start the process of reviewing again, re-interviewing some of those that were given a second interview. 3 of the schools that we've heard of from this cycle were given approval. John just mentioned 2 of the ones that were approved in November. What does approval mean? Just as a reminder, that simply means that they've been approved by CSRB to enter the ready to open process. That's still not a guarantee that they're going to open. They have to successfully complete that process that the Office of Charter Schools oversees. Those schools, if they do make it through that ready to open process, would open in 2025. And then we did deny 3 schools on first interview of the original 15 that submitted applications. That's our report.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, John. We appreciate you. And I would remind my fellow board members that if they want to watch the deliberations, they're live streamed next week, and they're also posted on YouTube afterwards. So,
all right. Thank you
both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, we now move to EICS 4 to discuss thoughts on policy amendment for the charter school renewal process. We have several rules and policies in place already for charter schools. Recent legislation retains the board's policy and rulemaking authority, but states that certain revisions or new rules we enact must be first recommended to us by the Charter Schools Review Board. Given that dynamic and the fact that the renewal policy that currently governs was drafted and enacted by the board in 2000, we have been having discussions on updating and revising. The Charter Schools Review Board has stated that they would welcome our thoughts on what consideration should be included in a revised policy recommendation. And so we wanted to take this time to provide our board members the opportunity to have their voices heard on these considerations that we will send over to the Charter Review Board. You have in your board packet the current renewal policy. Last month, Ashley Beccaro from the Office of Charter Schools presented on a draft revision of that charter review that the Charter Review Board was working on. This draft provision, which is also in the board packet, reflects some changes in legislation. I'd like to recap some of this board's comments following Ms. Becerra's presentation last month, and we can use that as a starting point for our discussion. Ms. Kamnitz indicated the desire for more specificity in these guidelines, stating that this would be helpful for schools to know. In particular, Ms. Kamnitz, as well as Chair Davis, pointed to the last bullet point under the non-renewal or assumption section, which reads, "Other good cause identified." Chair Davis talked about how reviewing the renewal process made clear for him the significant degree of coordination required among DPI departments. He suggested including in policy the need for DPI to sign off on compliance matters. Ms. Becerra indicated this would make our office job easier. So I'll stop with my recap, hopefully that I said that correctly, and open the floor for further discussion. Once again, this is a discussion item, so it's not on action. So, do you have any other comments?
A couple of specific observations in the guidelines that I believe are the draft that we're working from. 7 and 5 year are very consistent in the 5 categories that they look at, but the 3 year is slightly different, and I would suggest that there should be the same 5 bullet points with different values in each of those categories. That would be one suggestion that I would have. I noticed that in the 7-year renewal, the only requirement as regards to low performance is that the school not be currently designated as low performance. I would have a question about that if it would come to me if the school had been low performing for the last 5 years, but then had 1 year that it wasn't low performing. So I would give some more thought to what that metric ought to look like. And then I do agree with Chair Davis's point, as you just read, that that having some process by which the departments at DPI sign off on some of these bullet points ahead of time before the Office of Charter School brings it forward would be highly advisable.
Superintendent?
I would point out that suggestion was made, and the department has not had a chance to discuss that. I think it put Ashley in an awkward position to have to weigh in on whether or not that was a good idea for everyone. And so we look forward to having that conversation internally.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Chair Davis?
Yeah, I just, so I do think, I want to thank the Charter Review Board for listening to our discussion of the guidelines and responding to some of our concerns. I think it's important that we incorporate into the revised policy the updated guidelines and building on some of the comments Ms. Kamnitz made. I think that's point number 1. 2 is, given the change in the process where the review board is now inserted into the process as the approval authority, whereas in the past all applications came to us, the application decision and the sort of compliance role was all contained in the state board now. The fact now that there's the review board having a role in the application process, I think merits us teasing out more of the compliance responsibilities that we want to see happening as part of that process. And I just think it's a reasonable and important step to take to make sure that we understand that each of the responsible departments within DPI, finance, exceptional children, federal programs, legal, so forth, have done their role to ensure that the school that's operating, that's asking for renewal, is operating in compliance with the law and the charter. And one way of formalizing that is just to make sure that there gets appropriate sign-off.
Superintendent.
So my understanding of the new budget is that that responsibility rests with the state superintendent. It is in the law that I have to let the state board know if there are any issues of non-compliance. So just from a logistics standpoint, it's my responsibility to check in with the aforementioned offices at the department to ensure that compliance, that the charters are in compliance. And then it's my responsibility to let the state board know when there is not compliance.
And I agree with that. The board also has the stated responsibility to define the mechanics of the relationship between the board and the department. And this is one way that we're defining that relationship in policy on this matter.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Thank you, Superintendent. You have anything else to add?
It just occurred to me, actually, is renewal also available for appeal to the state board, renewal decisions? Yes, so it's granting the charter? Yes. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Vice Chair. Legal counsel.
Make sure I answer that question. Not every renewal is appealable. If the superintendent wants to appeal it or the school wants to appeal it because they disagree with the review board's decision, then it's appealable.
We can't decide we're going to appeal.
No, I didn't mean, I'm sorry.
I just want to make that clear.
But if a school gets a 5-year renewal and they feel they should have had a 7, they have the right to appeal.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Duncan.
There's some new language in here that has been actually alluded to during the last renewal process involving comparability to certain schools within a district that creates some potential concerns. Just look at the 7-year, and it's in basically all the years. CSRB may also consider the comparability of student subgroups or grade levels to the LEA as opposed to the entirety of the school district. And that can be problematic in a number of different ways, both in terms of whether it's a lower performing schools and trying to match up with a demographic that may or may not exist in another school. In what area are we considering? Is there, I'm just throwing out some questions, is there a comparable, I mean, we have had some charter schools that have A grades, but at the same time, they're not meeting growth. So are we matching up comparability for that purpose, for example? So there's a number of different directions that can go. It's typically been defined as the district, and even that got confused with, I think, with at least one of the things that came up last time, because it became a debate whether it was an Asheboro City school or a Randolph County school, and what it was being compared to. So it seems to me that whatever approach you take, some clarity is going to be necessary, or better clarity would be necessary as to what you're using as a judgment point on that. The other thing, just, and language can be important. I'll just look at the 7-year renewal that's up there right now. The school has not been on financial non-compliance disciplinary status the last 2 years. So theoretically, it could be a 10-year, it's been on financial non-compliance for 8 years, although hopefully that would never happen. But then the last 2 years, it's not on financial non-compliance, and so it would be subject to either whatever renewal period's being suggested, because that same language appears in multiple renewal periods. That also seems somewhat problematic in terms of what are the definitions about what those 2 years are, and just some clarity on that, I think, becomes important as well. Those are just some comments and looking at the language.
Thank you. Ms. Campbell.
Yes, and thank you, Chair Duncan, Vice Chair Duncan, because that was one of the points I wanted to make to your original point about comparable groups. In the 10-year renewal, which I believe was just straight out of the statute, it says, if a school's charter results in it providing services to certain targeted subgroups, then the school academic performance shall be judged in comparison to the academic outcomes of the students in the same subgroup in the local school administrative unit. I would suggest that that language be considered for 7-year, be consistent across all the renewal levels.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. We'll share your comments with the Charter Review Board, and so we probably need to move forward. So, and this is still a discussion item, so it can come back. Anybody else have any questions? Before Hold on 1 second. Dr. Oxendine.
Mr. Berry, I want to make sure that I'm clear about the whole discussion on comparability. So it reads as that, what it basically says in my mind is, if it's part of the charter mission to do something extraordinary in terms of methodology, instruction, program services, blah, 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 for a targeted group of students, that the achievement data will be compared with that particular group that's part of the mission statement and the those students within a district. Is that correct?
That's how I understood the 10-year.
Yeah, that's
Well,
how
I think that's good,
Yeah.
because I don't know that that's been that explicit heretofore.
in the past. So, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mike. At the risk of, in front of everybody, showing my ignorance, I'd like to think that as this group and any other group, be it, state superintendent schools, legislature, whoever, will start working its way towards having at least a similar expectation, because the public schools, you don't just close them. You have to take them over or declare them a low-performing school and put some extra expectations. I'd like to see, and again, this is my ignorance showing, I guess, but work towards where a school has similar expectations as far as results. And without going through all of the charter school, traditional schools, to me it's important that each child get a good education wherever they land. But I don't think we're guaranteeing that very well if you're holding one to a higher standard or one to a lower standard. And I realize it can't be the same because they're two different entities. But they could be a whole lot more similar than they are, I believe.
Thank you. Great comment. So, anything else, Vice Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Blackburn, I agree with your comment that we need to make sure we share this discussion with the Charter Review Board so that they have an opportunity to comment on it at their next meeting in preparation for us considering this item for action at our January meeting.
Right.
I mean, given their schedule of applications, we need to support them in clarifying policy as they consider applications.
And they want that.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so we now go to EICS 5, policy amendment. So is that going to be you, Ryan? Legal counsel's up.
Good afternoon. I'm here to present, excuse me, a revision to State Board of Education policy DSTR 40, which addresses the reform models for continually low-performing schools. GS 115C-105.37B authorizes the State Board to create 4 school reform models, including the Restart model. Under this model, the State Board of Education authorizes local boards of education to operate qualifying schools with the same flexibilities and statutory exemptions as a charter school. DSTR 40 sets forth the qualifications application process and oversight of these school reform models. The recommended updates to the policy that are before you are intended to provide clarity and to better align with the statutory requirements. This change is also better align the policy with current practice and outline processes such as how the State Board initially authorizes the use of a reform model and the requirements for schools operating under the Restart model to document their use of operational flexibilities in their school improvement plan. Been working with Julie Garber on developing and updating this policy. I will note that the authorizing statute does require the State Board to adopt formal rules for these models, and I will be working with Julie in the Office of District and Regional Support to develop those. Those are not before you today because we still are working on the fiscal and regulatory analysis that has to, impact analysis that has to be completed and approved before that rule can go through the rulemaking process. But for today, you all have the policy before you, the amendments to the policy.
Any questions of Ryan?
Thank you.
So we have a couple of more items. This one is one of my favorite topics. So this is a report to the North Carolina General Assembly of Rowan-Salisbury Schools, the Renewal School System. So I'm going to call on our own Dr. Andrew Smith to introduce our presenter, and just thank you, Doctor.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, State Superintendent Truitt, members of the board, advisors, and those joining us both in person and virtually. I'm excited to introduce the annual report of the Renewal School System enacted by House Bill 986 in 2018. This legislation provides unique local-level decision-making through charter-like flexibility to one school district in North Carolina with flexibilities in curriculum, finance, budget, personnel, and calendar. The goal of the Renewal School System, as legislatively defined, is to allow a local board of education to design and create a comprehensive, with an innovative strategic vision for sustainable school improvement and student achievement through delivery of instruction and resources tailored to the needs of the students and the community. With that said, at the end of the 2022-2023 school year, it marked the legislation's 5th year of implementation in Rowan-Salisbury schools and is also denoted in legislation as a specific review benchmark year for the State Board of Education. Here with us today is Superintendent of Rowan-Salisbury Schools, Dr. Kelly Withers. She'll provide a presentation on the specific reporting indicators and metrics outlined in House Bill 986 that are required for the State Board of Education's review. While the report will provide specific quantitative measures, the chair and vice chair of the EICS committee recently traveled to Rowan-Salisbury Schools to view Renewal in action. This additional review provides a complementary qualitative approach to the implementation of Renewal and its future steps. I'll now turn over the microphone to Dr. Kelly Withers for her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Duncan, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, and all of the state board members. I am Kelly Withers. I'm the superintendent of Rowan-Salisbury Schools, and I'm proud to represent our school district today with an update of our renewal status. I also want to start, though, by thanking John Blackburn and Joe Chemnitz, who visited us last week to see Renewal in action in a small glimpse, and I'm sure they will have things to share as well as we progress through this presentation. And I also want to call out the shirt that you have on as representative of your visit to our district. So I'm going to jump in. Dr. Smith did a great job of reminding you why I'm here. And we're going to start out with the directional system that you've seen over the course of the few years that we visited. Last year, I reminded you that although the legislation was passed in 2018, there's been some bumps along the way and some positives along the way. But we're going to start with our directional system, and it has maintained since its inception, probably in 2019-ish. 2019-20 gets a little blurry for most people in the field, but we did develop this directional system and have reconnected to it over the last year. I came on as superintendent in September of 2022, so I finished my first year. But this directional system has remained the same, and we're committed to saying that our work is centered on our learners and has 3 parts of interpersonal skills, unique life goals, and academic skills. This doesn't mean that we spend a third of our time, but it rather means that we concentrate all of our work on all 3 of these areas. And I specifically today want to talk about the unique life goals as we move forward. As a real metric of what we're looking to move in our district is understanding where students want to go and guide them so that they are ready to go there when they exit our school district as graduates of Rowan-Salisbury Schools. So we, as legislatively dictated to us, we have to report on certain metrics, and we are going to start with our current state data about the test scores and other metrics. And I'm also going to share metrics that we have put into place in our district as monitors of our work in those 3 areas. But also an acknowledgement of the work that we have to do on the state metrics that are in place currently. If you'll go forward, we'll talk about the state metrics as the EOG and EOC proficiencies as well. So you can see that our data in these proficiency metrics took a dip as we've gone through the last couple of years. We have maintained what I would say, I think we're within 0.2% in our proficiencies, but we are well below where we want to be as a district. And I'll talk about action steps that we're putting in place at the end after we get through these metrics of really looking to how do we address these areas as well. Our next slide is our subgroup proficiency, and again, there you can see our lines leveling off, and we look to accelerate and move upwards in these directions with all of our subgroups for all of our students, because we are committed to every student in our district. As you go to the next slide, you will see our ACT mirrors in the same space. Our composite mean there, looking as it has moved down over the last couple of years, and we look as it's trying to, as we are working to stabilize and now accelerate that in the opposite direction, and again, we'll talk about that as well. The next slide is our growth slide. I do want to note there is a point of positivity in that slide. We do see an increase in our schools that exceeded growth as we've really tried to connect with that metric over the last year as we've worked towards our instructional practices alignment. I'll talk about that, but we are proud of the fact that we did increase our percentage that exceeded growth. And if you ask anyone in our district, and our visitors can share that we talked about this while we were there, our commitment is to exceeding growth in every one of our schools. And so we are working to align our instructional practices to make sure that we are moving in that direction, all the while concentrating on the student experience and specifically those unique life goals of our students of where they want to go when they graduate from our district. Our low-performing schools, we reached an all-time high for us, unfortunately, in last year, the year before, and we have stayed in that space. We are confident that we are moving that metric, and again, part of our goal of moving that metric is our commitment to exceeding growth, which is where we will start to move those metrics for our students as well as we commit to those instructional practices. Our CTE work keys data shows similar trends as our other data as well, and hopefully we will start to see that acceleration in that space. A few other data points that I do want to highlight. Our CTE enrollment. You can see a bar there of our total students that are eligible for CTE instruction versus the number that are enrolling in CTE courses. And over time, that metric is increasing because we have a real commitment to allowing students to see and experience all the varied areas and really emphasizing that CTE is a great way to do that. It's a great way to answer questions, equally important to figure out what you do not want to do as it is to figure out what you do want to do post-graduation. And CTE and our varied programs have been a great way for our students to investigate that. I want to also concentrate, when we talk about unique life goals, that's a K-12 experience. And we have a direct commitment and started this commitment early in our renewal journey to work-based learning. Quite honestly, that took a pause during the pandemic because of some of the pieces and obstacles that just the pandemic presented of students being in person and going into the workforce and experiencing those. But I want to show you some pictures of what we've done in the last school year. So you can see here there were 231 job shadow experiences, 254 internships in our high schools, and specifically our Bridges to Healthcare program, which is a paid internship for students entirely in our district that is community funded using our Novant partnership, where students, 9 internships were completed at $17 an hour for those students. Those students actually graduate from that program next week, and 15 more will go in next semester to start that program. As you can see on this slide, there we committed and had a job shadow day on February 2nd, where 233 junior and senior students were able to interact with 150 business and industry professionals. The Aspire and Hire event in April was 200 juniors and senior students, and 70 employers came in and actually hired people, offering contracts. The unique part about this event is not only was it our junior and senior students, but in the afternoons we invited the community in, the adults of the community in, to interact with these businesses as well in hopes for job opportunities for them as well. Manufacturing Week in October, 562 6th to 12th grade students were able to interact with 21 manufacturing facilities. So Freightliner, Power Curbers, Chewy, which is in Rowan County. All of these businesses opened their doors for students to come in and experience what the manufacturing industry looked like for them. Next slide. When I Grow Up event was our 5th grade career fair. So as I said, this is a K-12 experience. In October, we had 1,351 5th grade students that were able to visit 45 business booths and see and interact and learn what skills would be necessary if these were the areas that I wanted to go into. The Careers on Wheels 6th grade career event in November had over 1,200 of our 6th grade students that were able to interact with Careers on Wheels, DOT, emergency services, food trucks, mobile DJs. All of these Careers on Wheels where 6th graders were able to see what skills were necessary in those spaces. And then, as you were probably aware, our CTE and Habitat for Humanity Build Days, that's been highlighted as a promising practice through DPI, where our masonry, our carpentry, and our woodworking students are actually going on site with Habitat for Humanity to help build those homes for people in our community, which is extremely impactful for students in those areas to build something that remains there after the fact, and it's giving back to our community, but they're learning those skills alongside masters in those fields as well. Next up is a metric that we have been looking at, again, since the beginning of the renewal journey of enrolled, enlisted, and employed. This is self-reported data from our students. This metric became very important to us as we really emphasized unique life goals and the pathways that students choose after high school, and not choosing it for them, but allowing them to choose and seeing, are they ready? So you can see that we are gathering data. If a student is enlisting, what branch of the military are they enlisting in? If they're going into employment, is it actually aligned to their post-secondary goal? So it's not just, are you employed? It's, are you employed towards your post-secondary goal, because we believe there's a difference in that question. Many of our students are employed, but not employed in alignment with where they're going next by design, because they may be going to something else next, but we're carefully measuring that metric. And then you can see as well, we're looking at enrollment and where are they enrolled. Is it a four-year university? Is it a community college? Is it a career or trade school? What are those programs looking like for our students, and how do we make sure we're bridging that, but also that our students are ready for those steps? The next one is the student self-reported experiences. Again, our goal is that 100% of our students will graduate with an opportunity for work-based learning. So that could be a job shadow, it could be an internship, it could be an apprenticeship. We are at about 66.7 is our current metric of our students. By the time that they graduate, that opportunity has been provided for them. Some of that is self-determined. They find it themselves. Most of it, our staff is working with them to get them into placements in varied spaces so that that is happening for them. And then the metric that we are the most proud of is our graduation rate is really increasing. We have seen that's incredibly intentional work in our district. You can see it took a dip, and we are starting to make that acceleration again. We had done that work previously, and we're really emphasizing that 88.4% graduation rate in our district, and our goal is to exceed 90 and keep on going for our students. The other data metrics that are legislatively required of us is to report on our teacher attrition rates, as well as our personnel pieces and our principal turnover. So if you look at our teacher attrition rate, you can see that it has increased in the last year. Unfortunately, there's teacher pipeline issues, in case you haven't heard. and teacher staffing issues, in case you haven't heard. But we are trying to work creatively, and they were able to see in their visit some of the ways that we're doing that inside of our schools, specifically at their visit to Hurley Elementary. So the next slide will show you renewal teachers, which is unique to our district. So we have 177 total renewal teachers. That means that so we have 3 pipelines for teachers. We have the certified teacher pipeline that is in all of our schools across the state. We have the residency pipeline, which is the teachers that come in and immediately establish with a university partner to move towards licensure. And then a renewal teacher is not required to do that. They do not associate with a university. They do not have to get their teaching license. So where would we leverage that? Well, over time, that has changed, obviously. It could be that someone wants to come into the profession and see if this is something they're interested in before making the commitment directly to a university. It also could mean, for example, in a dance situation, that a dance studio owner can come in and teach in our building in the morning when their dance studios are closed, and then run their business in the afternoon without having to seek North Carolina licensure specifically in that space. So we have 177 of those teachers. 66 are in their first year, 49 are in their second year, 21 are in their third year, and 41 are beyond 3 years of experience. So I would like just to say and imagine that's roughly 10% of our workforce that are renewal teachers. And if you think through that, without that opportunity, that's 177 vacancies that would be in our district. This presents a challenge, which I'll talk about in just a second, but we are leveraging that personnel flexibility for those renewal teachers as well. Our principal turnover is down. We are looking at and I hesitate to even report on this because this could change at any moment. People ask me how many principal vacancies do I have. When I left the district today, I do not have any. And so that hope is that is the same when I return. But our principal turnover has continued to go down over time as well. And then our last one is student attendance, looking at our absentee rate, and you can see that it has flatlined, and we hoped, again, to accelerate that. And I do believe that the unique experiences that we create for students are exactly how we address the student attendance data as well. So Dr. Smith defined renewal for you in the areas of flexibility. I'm going to hit on those really quickly and just talk about those examples and then talk about some of the challenges before we go into the work we've done over the last year to really say where we are going moving forward. So we do have calendar flexibility, so we do have an early start calendar. Our staff was really clear with our visitors last week that we've only scratched the surface of what calendar flexibility can do, and I'll talk about why in the next slide. Curriculum flexibility, in full transparency, is difficult. Curriculum flexibility is difficult because we follow the same accountability metric that everyone else follows. And so when Renewal originally started, there was the idea behind curricular flexibility that we would identify fundamental standards and be held to those. That did not come to fruition. And so where you would see the most examples of our curriculum flexibility, and again, where they were able to see them is in our high schools, where you see integrated coursework, where you see classes offered together, English and social studies standards connected. They were able to visit the Spark Lab, which is part of Spark NC, which is a stackable course curriculum. We could do a whole nother presentation on that. That's not my presentation to give. Someone else will probably do that for you. But they were able to see that, and where students, I call it the choose your own adventure class, where they start and they're able to choose based on a beginning sequence of technology exploration in high-tech fields and then build as they see fit. That Spark Lab is actually across the state in about 17 or 18 different districts. The unique part for us is those districts had to get legislative flexibility to be able to do the Spark Lab. Our renewal flexibilities already gave us those, so we didn't have to leverage anything differently. And then our competency-based education exploration. Many of you have either visited or seen Morgan Elementary as a model of competency-based education, and their growth is now responding to the fact that they have been doing this for a few years, and we are seeing them move in the positive direction as well. I've talked about our personnel flexibility, and then of course we have financial flexibility where we receive our money in one bucket. That's how we describe it, and we are able to put that money where it matches our community and our students' needs. So the renewal challenges over the last few years, we have been able to identify some challenges to that. Calendar flexibility, quite honestly, the biggest challenge to that is it's a community challenge. If you look at leveraging a calendar in a different way, everyone is used to the way we do school. And so calendar flexibility, although moving to an early start was an easy piece, anything beyond that, 4-day weeks, extended days, going longer throughout the year, all requires community buy-in. And we have not leveraged in that space any of those specific pieces, but that is something that our staff did express, that they've started to think through what might that look like. Curriculum flexibility, I already referenced that challenge in the accountability area. Personnel flexibility, so when we talk about 177 renewal teachers in our district, that presents a challenge because they're not associated with a teacher prep program or have been through a teacher prep program, that falls to us to build those capacities within inside the classroom. So that is a unique opportunity for us. We've embraced that opportunity and are extremely grateful for our financial challenge, our financial flexibility so that we can do that. For example, at Hurley Elementary, we were able to showcase the lab school model where we have a TA to teacher pipeline where 2 people are in the room. Their goal is that you can't tell the difference between the TA and the teacher, and it's almost like a gradual release model into teaching. And then financial flexibility, when you have one bucket, people often ask us, that makes me nervous about oversight. We actually have more oversight than we have ever had because our schools, when they look to use their financial flexibilities, have to submit a needs assessment, a plan that matches their needs assessment. They have to justify and defend the reasons why they want to spend money differently than what it would have normally been allotted for, and tie metrics to that movement. And then there's just the implementation challenge. I think in any time, one of the biggest lessons we've learned through Renewal is anytime you're trying to implement educational transformation, the biggest piece is being able to sustain people in their positions. When you start to move in a transformational space and you have a massive change in leadership, whether that's a building level leader or district level leadership, that creates some implementation challenges. As I shared with you last year, since we started Renewal, if you are counting interims, I'm the 5th superintendent since we started it, and that presents some challenges. Not good or bad necessarily, there's just opportunities there for us to align, which we've spent the last year attempting to do. So let's talk about that space. Over the last year, we've composed our strategic plan, which is called Renewal in Action. We started with grounding practices for our district. We believe that these are not strategies that will change in 5 years. These are belief statements that we must have in place in order to accelerate the work of innovation in our district. And so there are 5 there, and I talked about instructional alignment. The 3rd one down is the real space that we've really been really building capacity in our buildings. For example, you can see our grounding practices there. We prioritize student voice. We take that very seriously, that students are a valued voice in our district. I met with our Student Advisory Council yesterday. They are not hesitant at all to share what they think their areas of focus and our areas of focus should be, and we do prioritize their voice as they move forward. We also look that every student has a consistent adult advocate. But the 3rd one, as I mentioned, is that teaching is rooted in standard-aligned, engaging instruction and engaging lessons with authentic feedback. That's a 3-part statement for us, and they are core to anything else that we're going to do in the district. So as our guests, as well as really what it's for, are our students. They're supposed to know what they're learning, and it's clearly stated in an engaging lesson, and the teachers, as well as every adult and student, learns how to give authentic feedback to each other. And you can also see there looking at the pieces of professional learning communities, and then the final piece of our teachers being empowered. That is really a statement of our renewal status because we have charged our teachers with teacher-led design work to design the transformation that we are looking towards. So within our plan, we have 5 priority areas. 4 of them, I think, probably are not unique to us. If you pulled a strategic plan of any district, you're going to see 4 of these. The first one is building academic excellence. And we're committed to the progress of students towards mastery through disciplines, and inquiry-based learning experiences. So when you look at the 4 action steps there, our hope is what you see in that space is that we're committed, 1, to mastery, which is a different way of giving feedback and learning from students and meeting students where they are. We're also committed to relevance and making sure that we understand why we're teaching what they're teaching and what that means for our students. You'll see that we are really looking at problem-based learning. Again, these are not new or different necessarily. The implementation of it looks differently, but those commitments are there. The last action step in that area is one that our community is extremely energized by, and that is that our district has launched a robust kindergarten readiness campaign. Last year, our students came in 16% kindergarten ready based upon the metrics that we used to determine that. This year, 21%. That still means that we have 79% of our students that are not ready for kindergarten curriculum. And so we believe that part of that is educating the community on what does that even mean. What does it mean to be kindergarten ready? What are the skills? Greg Alcorn, some of you are familiar with him. He lives in our community, and AppSeed is something that we have leveraged as well. And his group and AppSeed is helping us in that partnership. But we have really launched a social media and print campaign, and we say our dream is that if you go grocery shopping in Rowan-Salisbury schools and you push a cart, the little card on the end of the cart is going to have kindergarten readiness information on it so that every family can see what does it mean for my student to be kindergarten ready. Same thing in our doctor's offices, in our hospitals, in our health departments, in our barber shops. Every place that we want students, and we know students are existing in our community, we want that to be a county or a community-wide campaign to raise the awareness of what does that mean. Our second priority area is what I do believe is unique for us and really where we've leveraged a lot of our renewal pieces to connect content to authentic, personalized learning experiences. And so these are learning experiences inside and outside of our classrooms. It's about capturing our students' passions, which is knowing our students. You've talked before about career pathways and career plans, but really getting to know kids kindergarten forward. What is it that they're interested in, and what is that through line to where they may be in their future or not? Those sometimes diverge, and sometimes there's a clear through line to what they're interested in. It's also about making sure that we're working with our economic development folks in our district to know what are they looking at to draw businesses into our community 10 years down the road. And knowing that so that we're preparing our students for those opportunities of the future. And then the last one is about establishing a reading culture in every school, in every classroom. That's again a community campaign. We are putting classroom libraries in, we have them in some, but we're making sure that we have high interest reading material to really re-engage with the joy of reading, not just reading for a test or reading for a passage, and having our adults talking about that in the community. What are you reading? Whether it's an RV magazine or whether it is Romeo and Juliet, what are you enjoying reading and how do you find joy in that skill? Our third priority is reinforcing wellness. So prioritizing well-being in our students and our staff and our community. Again, this is about enhancing awareness of the health and wellness, social emotional learning of and safety in our schools. Really keying in on our second was the post-secondary health mindset, making sure that we're teaching nutrition, physical activity, stress management, all the skills that we know we need for both our students and our staff. Aligning our code of conduct, and then of course safety and security in our schools. We're unfortunately reminded each day that that is an area of focus that we have to be focusing in on. We have some unique opportunities in our priority 4, which is investing in talent. We are committed to investing our time and assets into recruiting, retaining, and developing our talent. Because of our unique flexibilities in personnel, we can recruit anywhere. We can recruit anywhere we want to go to try to find people that have content expertise to teach our students, that bring the content alive and connect it to relevant lessons. And so we're committed to acquiring that highly effective talent pool that's representative of our diverse student population. We're committed to our coaching and evaluation practices, and we're also committed to creating career ladders for everyone. So you are aware of advanced teaching roles, you're aware of other pieces and parts to that, but it's not just about our teachers. It's about, is there a career ladder for every person in our district so that they see leadership opportunities if they choose to engage in those opportunities and a clear pathway to those. Our last priority area is supporting organizational foundations. So it's about being good stewards of our property, our procedures, and our people. And again, you can see that we are looking at aligning our decisions for our facilities. They are old. They are very old, actually. Again, our visitors can share that with you. Our facilities are, our average high school is about the 60s, 1960s. So we have, and that's all of our schools for the most part with the exception of one high school. And then making sure that that creates its own level of need. And so making sure our facilities match all these amazing experiences we just described. Establishing a culture and reputation of excellence in instruction, passion, and purpose. And this is really about connecting with our community. Our Chamber of Commerce is one of our biggest cheerleaders. Again, the visitors last week were able to connect with our community in a piece of a panel. So they were able to hear from a president of a bank, the chair of the county commission, the chair of our school board, and a college, as well as a philanthropic group, just really to talk about their energy around our school district. And it was important for them to hear from them, because we will not be able to lift this without them. And so hearing that energy was also a piece of it. And then also making sure that our operation and talent decisions are aligned. The last couple of things just to talk about before we share or answer any questions is how are we measuring this? That is the most popular question that we get. And your representatives did not fail to ask that as well, of varied groups of how we're doing that. So internally, these are just two examples. I didn't include all of them. Internally, we are using what we call signaling questions. So these are published for our principals. These are the things that we're talking about in our data meetings. They're really talking about this work in action. So if we're committed to, for example, instructional experiences, how are we budgeting for that? How are we allowing time for that? How are we committing to that? These are internal metrics, and you can see possible evidences that are there. Summative assessment, formative assessments, interim assessments, portfolios, observations, progress monitoring. And you can see, again, we have these for every one of our priority areas that drive our internal conversations. Also, if you go forward to the metrics of success, we are committed to these long-term measures of success. Enrolled, enlisted, employed. That is extremely important to us, that our students are prepared for one of those three areas of their choice when they exit and graduate from our system. Educational attainment, through My Future NC, as you know, they measure the number of adults over the age of 25 that have a high-quality credential or degree in their pathway. That is also another metric that we hope to improve through these efforts. The retention of quality staff, and we intentionally put in there quality staff. Retaining quality is what we are hoping to do through these. And then again, climate. The increasing the student, family, staff, and community satisfaction and engagement is a metric of our work. Does the community believe that we are doing work on the best interest of their students and preparing them for their next steps? And that is one of the four important long-term metrics of success of this work. Thank you.
Dr. Withers, an amazing presentation, but I'd like to call upon my fellow board member for your comments, please. I'm gonna chime in, obviously.
Well, I just have to share, the first school we went to was Hurley Elementary School, and they operate with a house system, also the same kind of structure that you saw in the Harry Potter movies. Each child is a member of one of 5 houses. And it's a random assignment, and so in a classroom, you'll see kids that are, all over the place. So, and they very much, and the children that we talk to, they very much relate to their particular house. Mm-hmm. At the end of our visit, there's a big wheel in the main hall, and you spin that, and it's a thing that goes around, and it decides what house you're gonna be in. And we had kids standing around yelling as our houses were being, and staff. So, black, no, I can't remember what your color was. Anyway, I am now a member of Convictione, and I just will share with you that the core value of Convictione is togetherness. The mission is to honor and celebrate the unique gifts of everyone. The characteristics are respecting others, collaboration, and listening. So it actually, if you look at each house all of these are desirable characteristics, but the kids are familiar with all of them. And so, anyway, it just really animated the school. But the other, a couple of other things. In the very first slide, one of the values that undergirds the whole thing is that teachers will lead in the design and implementation. And we over and over again, we saw this in the faces and the enthusiasm of teachers. They were so excited about the work that was going on in their schools and their involvement in decisions and how they were going to manage their classrooms. It was just, you really felt that excitement from the teachers. The Spark Lab was amazing. The kids were all over the place and the kinds of things they were doing. It's a whole, I wasn't familiar with it, but we really probably ought to hear about it because it's an amazing program for kids. And this was at South Rowan High School, which is the one we visited, but they will be making that available to kids in other high schools as well. It's a very new thing, but the kids are loving it. The Renewal teachers it was very interesting because at first you think, well, how are these teachers going to progress into effective teachers? But the structure to support those teachers is very strong. I mean, the school, Hurley is where we talked about this the most, but the school is very, very committed to supporting these teachers. It reminded me in some ways of the pathways structures that we had talked about. There are teacher leaders that are supporting these new teachers, and as I recall, it was a very high percent that the percentage of renewal teachers that convert to residency teachers. Once they're there for a year or two and they are comfortable that they want to be teachers, then most of them end up in a residency program. Some of the more specialized ones do not, but the conversion rate is very high, as I recall. Let's see, those were off the top of my head. John, what else? What do you have to? We had a great day.
So I've had many wonderful experiences since I've been given the opportunity to serve on the State Board of Education. So I told Dr. Withers today that last week was my best day. It's my best day.
Thank you.
It really made my heart happy. So I would remind all of you that what she said, that they've had 5 superintendents since they've started this. The path is moving along very quickly, and they're doing great things for students and for teachers, for staff. We got to visit 2 amazing schools. They had a king and a queen, so I'll tell you that we talked about life skills, so soft skills, life skills. So we were greeted by 5th graders, and there was a young gentleman who was the king of his 5th grade class, and a young lady who was the queen of her 5th grade class. And they immediately started telling us about their expectations and about their school. So they were the first ambassadors we met, and Rupin was with us. So it was really an amazing experience. So I liked many pieces and parts of it. They've had some challenges, as all schools have had. They recognize those, and they're moving forward with those. Their teacher of the year at Hurley Elementary is from Columbia. So a pretty amazing lady who is going to be working on her visa so she can stay and continue to reach out to that community. That particular school is very driven with a lot of Hispanic folks, and Hurley Elementary is the lifeblood of that community. So they're doing amazing things. So that reminded me of what schools do for our communities. So are there any questions? I'm over time, but anyway. So.
It's absolutely fascinating presentation. I can tell you have very dynamic, high energy folks. I'm going to ask a question that makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but nevertheless I need to ask it. Because you mentioned something about creating a reading culture and expanding opportunities for reading resources and literature in your schools and in your classrooms. And I'll tie it also to a statement you made about the involvement of the community. I'd like to know, if you have created any kind of committees or councils made up of parents and the community to ensure that we've got the right kind of reading material, developmentally appropriate on the right topics for kids.
Sure. So I think part of the group, when you talk about original renewal, a lot of teacher-led design pieces. And so that was one of the challenges, and when you're so narrowly focused, you have to make sure that you don't forget there are other stakeholders in that as well. So the parent involvement, the community involvement in renewal, but then broader, when we did the strategic plan, we had a group of community members that came forward. The two pieces that were the most energy, experiences is one, but the two pieces, specific action steps, the kindergarten readiness and the joy of reading, are the pieces that the community were most focused on. The joy of reading piece, including that as a community effort, was really important to us. As far as the evaluation of reading materials specifically, our academic branch within our organization has worked to develop those committees over the last few months to include teachers and then also community and parents to look at that. We are working through a process of how do you make sure you have developmentally appropriate materials representative of the students that are in your building so that they can connect and have the joy of reading, but really also understanding what developmentally appropriate is and defining that as well. So we're in the early stages of that work, but our community has been incredibly supportive of making sure that we know and understand the needs, but also the openness to make sure that our students are represented.
And by the way, I can see, you mentioned Greg Alhorn. I can remember seeing him right now.
Greg is a huge partner for us and supporter.
You had another question?
Quickly, the pipeline of principals, you said that you don't have any, you're in a good place with principals, knock on wood. So what about the health of your pipeline in your district as far as APs?
So that is another area of us focusing in on. We're building instructional leadership capacity in all of our leaders. So we meet obviously monthly with our principals and our assistant principals. We immediately saw a need last year as we were doing this to bring both of them in the room at the same time, which is incredibly difficult with our instructional coaches when students are in school. So we leverage work days, e-learning days for partnership in and having those instructional capacity conversations. The health of the pipeline as far as our assistant principals is growing. The capacity is growing with an intentional focus in our resources, which is our human resources and our finance area, making sure that we're intentionally investing. It's the same thing for those career ladders. You have to have that for your leader as well. Not all assistant principals want to be principals. Some of them are looking at other directions as well. But just as I said about our students, it's about knowing our employees as well and where they're going next and investing in them there too.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Superintendent?
Dr. Withers, thank you so much for coming in person today and sharing all of this wonderful information with us. We all know that leadership matters, and I think this is proof positive of a district that's doing innovative things because it has amazing leadership. So thank you for that. My question is, when you mentioned that the curriculum flexibilities are difficult, which I totally appreciate. When you look at your other flexibilities, in particular personnel and funding, is there one of the other of those that you would say is more critical to your secret sauce or to this formula of success?
It definitely would not be calendar, despite people wanting me to say that. I think that, quite honestly, if I had to rank them, the financial flexibility is extremely important for the personnel flexibility to work. So if you didn't have the financial flexibility to be able to pledge professional development resources for the personnel, it would be very difficult. So I wouldn't want to give either of them up, but I think the financial flexibility makes the personnel flexibility work.
Would you be able to, is it possible to summarize quickly what is your financial flexibility? You don't have buckets of...
That is correct.
Okay.
So if you...
One big pot of money.
One big pot of money.
Right.
Yeah.
So as you know, there are double-digit numbers of codes that we get if we were a traditional school district, that we get money, and it's assigned to a very specific area. We do not get them in those PRC buckets. We get them as one large bucket, and we can put the money where we think our community and our student needs it the most.
But you still get the same amount of funding
Yes.
that you would otherwise, it's just
One bucket.
those barriers are removed.
Yes, we do not get any increased funding. My financial person would want to make sure that I said that. We do not get anything increased. We do not get any increased allotment of personnel either. It is just that we have the flexibility to put the money into the area we think it's most needed.
Got it, thank you.
Ms. Gaines?
Yeah, and if I could, I'm glad that you raised that, because the other thing that hit me really hard, and we didn't just see it in the schools, we visited 2 schools, we heard from the principals in both schools how important the flexibility was to them. And part of that is because they have a part. Kelly doesn't say this is how much money this school is gonna get. It is, they define their needs, they design their plan, they come to the leadership team to get the okay for it. But also, we met with a group of principals and assistant principals who we also heard very clearly from in terms of financial and HR flexibility. We met with Kelly's cabinet, and we heard it there. The finance officer was very clear about how careful she is to be mindful that these are, it's very careful management of these funds. And then finally, we met with a group of parents and leaders from the community who also understood this and could perceive how good it was, and were very enthusiastic about what's happening. But I think the importance of flexibility we heard all day long and saw the results of it.
Saw the results, so yes.
Just quickly, Jill, you mentioned the houses that the kids
Uh-huh.
find themselves in. Are they there for like a 3rd grader? Is he or she in that house for the 3rd grade year? Is it in connection with the
whole
with
time
the
they're at the
wheel?
school? No.
So-
I would assume that's for any new student and people
Sure.
that like us to visit.
So they do not spend it every year. They become part of a house and they stay in that house. So it's
No, for
also
the whole
mirrored,
time.
no, for the whole time they're there. It also mirrors their, the house system is at Ron Clark Academy as well, which is a place that they've visited too. But they spin the wheel, and they mentioned the king and queen. That is demonstrating leadership over years in that house as well. And every staff member, I'm a member of a house, and they will forever remember what house you are in. And if you wear the wrong color there, they will remind you that you are wearing the wrong color. And so it is, they become really tied to that group and to those adults in the building. That goes back to the statement that was on there about it having a consistent adult advocate in the building. It is about making sure that they know who they are attached to. And if you ever would like to see it, there are house celebrations that are extremely high energy and very loud, to be honest. But it is a celebration of their skills, traits, leadership development, and specifically, quite honestly, it's a creation of belonging for students.
Right.
Mhm.
And it's
Somewhere where they feel safe in.
Yes.
You know,
That's the purpose.
And it doesn't
which
change
might
every
not be
year.
outside.
It doesn't change every year.
Right.
And don't, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know if other schools have the house system, but we just did the Hurley, but the houses meet on Fridays for some period of time. So
They do.
every week
They do.
they get together with their houses.
Thank you.
I have one quick question
Sure.
about the renewal teachers. When they are placed, is there a system for like the courses they are placed into, or is it just about like feeling the need? Or because my thought was when we think about beginning teachers, and you mentioned that they are not necessarily certified, but they're getting those supports, that we often sort of overload our beginning teachers with the highest need students. Are they placed with more advanced students so that our more seasoned quality teachers can then move to serving those students of the most need? Like, is there thought given to where those renewal teachers are placed, or are they just placed where they have the holes?
So I hope there's thought given to all of our teachers of where they're placed, but yes, so they apply at specific schools. So we don't just place the renewal teachers; they apply just like anyone else, and we look at their degree to see what it is in. They are required to have the content expertise or what it might be. There's a certain GPA requirement. As far as they're placed in classrooms where the principal feels like their skill set fits the needs of the students that are there. The layers, they get the same supports and then more, if that makes sense, in their teaching, mentors and observations. I didn't mention this, it was asked, are they paid the same? They are, but they are also all on a one-year contract. So if you stay renewal, you never come off the one-year contract to advance beyond that. So
One of the things we saw was a young gentleman who was admittedly not a very good teacher in the beginning, but he was surrounded by support, and we saw him, I think, in year 3. And he is he's an amazing leader among his community, and his skill set has moved forward a great deal. So he will not be a renewal teacher long, so that's my prediction about him. So I'm sorry to cut this off, but we are over time limit, so thank you, Dr. Withers, for your amazing presentation, and we'll look forward to coming back and visit the houses.
Anytime.
So,
Thank
thanks.
you.
So we have one more thing. It's consent agenda nominations to the North Carolina Virtual Public School Advisory Council. So we have, those are in your board packet. Dr. Oates. So anyway, those are there. If you have any questions, ask me before tomorrow. So there we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn. That moves us to our final committee of the day, the Business Operations Committee, led by Vice Chair Duncan. Dr. Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Along with John Blackburn, we lead the Business Operations Committee, and I know everyone has waited breathlessly for this report today. We'll try not to keep you holding your breath too long. Our first item is, we have 5 actions on first reading, and our first one is Biz Op 1, which is the approval of contracts over $500,000, and Dr. Jenny Korn is here to present on our one contract that we have this month in that category.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So just a quick update for you all. You know, for the past several years, we've been partnered with the EVOS team at SAS to do the recovery analysis. This continues that work as directed by the legislature and the state budget. They put a line item in the state budget for 2 years of non-recurring funds for a little over $500,000 each year to continue that recovery analysis in partnership with DPI. So that's what we're bringing before you today. If you go to the next slide. And historically, what we've shared with you all is this cohort model. So we've really been looking at what was the impact of the lost instructional time in 2022, and then in 2023, we did recovery analysis. And we shared with you guys a lot of information, both at the state level and at the district level, and with our charters, effect sizes. What was the overall impact of the pandemic on the K-12 public school system? Well, over the last year, in addition to doing that work, we also started this new conversation with the EVOS team because of a lot of questions we were getting, you all were getting, our superintendents and charter leaders were getting. We talked with them, if you go to the next slide, about this idea of how will we know as a state, as a district, and as a school when we have recovered? Is there a way that we could measure this rigorously and empirically? So we worked with the EVOS team at SAS, with Dr. John White, and we ran through the analysis during 2022. This funding allows us to continue that into 2023, 2024, and beyond. And it gives us a way to quantify recovery while also accounting for the local context. We know that every single school and every single district is unique. They started at different places prior to the pandemic. They were on different sort of trajectories prior to the pandemic. And so the impact that it had, it's really important that as a state we recognize that. And so this analysis gives us a chance to do that. So what we're proposing is next month, we will bring before the board the analysis for 2023, get feedback from the board, make sure it makes sense, it's aligned, but it really does give us this long view of performance over time and looking at what the trends were prior to the pandemic, what the impact was, and gives not just the state, but individual districts and charters ways to benchmark recovery that makes the most sense for them and their communities. It's been a really successful conversation we've been able to have, and I'm really grateful to the legislature. I think leadership here is that we're able to continue this type and level of analysis in partnership with the EVOS team.
Any questions or comments about the continuation of this grant? All right, thank you very much.
Thank
Dr.
you.
Moore. That brings us to BizOp 2, which is the Extended Learning and Integrated Student Supports Allotment Policy and Grant RFP and Application. These are commonly called or referred to as Ellis grants. I think we've all heard that term several times. Susan Brigman is here to talk about this year's allotment. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As Vice Chair Duncan said, I'm going to be presenting on the Ellis grant. And so the purpose of this grant is to fund high-quality, independently validated, extended learning and integrated student support service programs for our at-risk students in an effort to help them raise their academic outcomes. As far as the funding source, the General Assembly of North Carolina utilized Session Law 2023-134, House Bill 259, to appropriate $7 million per year from the At-Risk Student Services Alternative School Allotment for the Ellis Grant Competition for 23 through 25. The funds are supposed to be utilized over the next 2 years, and $2,000 will be earmarked for administration and evaluation of the grant. And our grant participants can apply for up to $500,000 each year for the course of the 2 years. As mandated in the legislation, the nonprofit corporations and nonprofit corporations working in collaboration with local school administrative units, or LEAs, are eligible to apply for the Ellis grant to implement new or existing eligible programs for at-risk students. So this does restrict standalone applications from local school administrative units, charter schools, lab schools, or other governmental or educational agencies. In order to apply for this funding, applicants must be in good standing with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. So organizations previously or currently receiving competitive grants administered through the Office of Federal Programs must be in good standing. And so what that means is that if they have had any program or fiscal monitoring reviews with question cost or anything like that through July of 2023, all of those things would have to have been resolved. Any findings that they may have had from the Office of the State Auditor from the previous 5 years would be considered for this good standing. And if applicable, if organizations are previously and or currently are receiving Ellis funding, they must have submitted their last performance period, for the last performance period, a completed final evaluation on time, and they must have consistently met 70% of their most recent State Board of Education approved Ellis program enrollment goal. So additionally, what we're proposing is that any subgrantees that have received any competitive grants from the Office of Federal Programs that have been terminated by NCDPI are considered not in good standing and are not eligible to apply for 2 consecutive Ellis grant competitions. If the applicant organization is deemed not in good standing at any point during our Level 2 and Level 3 review process, we reserve the right to recommend them to not be funded for this grant. So some of the major grant parameters that you need to be aware of, and these have been pretty consistent over the last several years, is that the programs must focus on serving students in one or more of the following at-risk categories. So you're looking at students that are at risk of not performing on grade level, as demonstrated by their statewide assessments, or not on track to meet year-end expectations, students that are at risk of dropping out of school, or students that are at risk of school displacement due to suspension or expulsion as a result of antisocial behaviors. So during the academic year, all applicants must propose to operate an integrated student supports, or ISS program, that provides supplemental support, which is often called Tier 2, and or intensive support, which is often called Tier 3 services during school day hours. So in addition to that, applicants can also choose to implement core support, which are typically called our Tier 1 services. Applicants can also propose to operate an extended learning program in addition to the required school day, ISS programming. So they can have after-school as well and summer learning. But for this grant cycle, we are proposing that applicants cannot just propose to use Ellis funds for only extended learning programs. So not just only for after-school, but with this grant, the main purpose of it, and when you look at the legislation, it says and. So integrated student supports is a key piece, I think, in our schools that we're missing opportunities if we just allow just after school. And with my position here, at least I know we have 21st Century Community Learning Center grants, which are also used for after-school programming, and this is also going to help us with supplanting issues that we may encounter sometimes with programs that are already receiving 21st Century funds and then also apply for Ellis funds. So we want to make sure that there's no duplication. So in addition to providing services to students during the school day, all proposed Ellis programs must include a family engagement component. And one of the reasons that we have added that into our proposal this time is that we feel like family engagement is a key factor. If we're going to reduce chronic absenteeism in our students, we have to get parents on board for that. And so for this grant, applicants must propose to host at least 2 educational workshops over the course of the 2 years. So one workshop should focus on helping families understand the connection between attendance and future student success. And the other one, we would like for them to provide strategies to families to help them know how to support their students' social emotional well-being, provide them access to community resources or any family mental health. And so the implementation of all of the 2 educational workshops can be completed within the 2 years. So we're not asking them that they have to do 2 each year, but just over the course of the 2-year period that they have 2. Based on the legislation, priority consideration has to be given to applicants that demonstrate models that are going to focus services and programming on schools that are identified as state low performing. So for the purposes of this grant, 51% of the schools served must be low performing. And then we're also directed to give priority to applicants that are nonprofit organizations that are working in partnership and collaboration with a school district. So especially if they are utilizing Title I funds as their match, because with the Ellis grant, as you probably all know, it's been the same way over the course of several years. For every $3 they receive in grant funds, they have to match $1. And so some additional priorities, we are looking to propose to give a priority point to applicants that are proposing to serve students from at least one alternative learning program and or school in their service area. And then a priority point is also being proposed to be given to applicants who want to run the after school and the summer learning program in addition to doing the during the day supports. And just as a reminder, there's not priority consideration based on the region served anymore, because we have begun this process now for a couple of years where we are providing so many grants per State Board of Education region. And so we are proposing right now at a minimum that we will do 2 Ellis grants per State Board of Education region, as long as there are applicants that meet the quality bands. And after that, then they would be prioritized based on their actual scores. And so for this grant, PRC 052 is what is going to be utilized to make sure these funds are pushed out to the grantees. And there is an allotment policy that has been submitted for your review and approval along with the RFP application for the Ellis program. And so this is just a tentative timeline right now. As you can see, we're in December. We have some training scheduled with, if we are approved to move forward with this grant, we do have trainings coming up very soon next week. Applications would be due in January, and then we would be coming back to the State Board in March to provide you with our recommendations for funding. Are there any questions?
Any questions? What we're being asked here for is basically permission to proceed to go ahead with the request for proposals process, and then we'll come back once that process has been completed. I do want to thank Susan and her colleagues, because it's a lot of work to administer these grants, as it is with the 21st Century grants, and we'll have some information on that later. But it's a great deal of work to try to administer these, and so I appreciate very much all the work that goes into not just selecting, but monitoring and overseeing this difficult process. When one further comment though, just historically, the $7 million used here is part of the ESSER 3 funds that was voted by the legislature to be used for this purpose, that is for ESSER grants, or excuse me, for Ellis grants out of the ESSER funds. We did it last year also for $7 million, again pursuant to the legislature assuming control of those funds and making the legislation for how they're to be used. John Blackburn and I, Vice Chair, did ask for information about any evaluation, if you will, of the grants and analysis of what the results are. And Susan, Ms. Brigman, thankfully, gave us what she had, which is there are some post-grant reports done. There's no analytics. There's no student-level information. It just generally summarizes what was done in the program. So this is not one where we could report back to the board we have clear results of what happened as a result of this grant work. And I think, and that's not for lack of trying on behalf of the department. I think every effort is to get all relevant information is obtained. So, but that's, I don't want expectations to be that there'll be some report about this a year from now, because that's not the way it has worked in the past.
Right, we report to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee a couple of times throughout the cycle. Superintendent Truitt, did you have a question?
I just want to clarify. I thought that these were not ESSER dollars. I thought that this
They're
was
not
from the
this time. They
at-risk-
were previously ESSER dollars. This is just from the state budget this time.
Yeah, they're from the at-risk.
At-risk funds this
Yes,
time.
okay, thank you.
But they have been
Just making sure I
previously with
remember.
ESSER, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, then let's go to BizOp 3, thank you. BizOp 3 is digital learning grants. We've now gone through several cycles with these, and Lindsay Seif is here to report to us on this latest cycle for digital learning grants and the request for proposals, similar to what we just heard from Ms. Brigman.
Yeah, good afternoon, Vice Chair Duncan, board members, and Superintendent Truitt. Thank you for having us back. We are excited to bring another round of RFPs for the Digital Learning Initiative Grant. This is, I believe, my 5th year of having the pleasure of bringing this to you all and overseeing these grants and the amazing work that goes hand in hand with them. Today, we are bringing to you 2 different grant opportunities. We have an impact grant. That is a 3-year grant for traditional PSUs. It's up to $95,000 per year. And then for charter, regional, or lab schools, it's up to $30,000 per year. And that's the focus on blended learning, innovative practices, coaching, data-informed practices, emerging technologies, personalized learning, and or artificial intelligence, or maybe all of those things mixed together. The second grant that we will be bringing to you all is our Emerging Technologies Grant. And the intention of this grant is to provide PSUs for funding that they may not have for innovative practices that they see happening across the nation or around the world. So the focus on that would be innovative practices, personalized learning, artificial intelligence, promoting student understanding of digital rights and responsibilities, and encouraging problem solving through the use of technology. Now, when I met with Vice Chair Duncan, he had some great and pointed questions about our AI addition that I'm sure that you all saw into our RFP. So we want to ensure that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that we are safely and securely going about using artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence in a way that would be safe and have a positive outcome for staff and students. So a few things that we have put into place would be some professional learning guidelines. So staff, students, and communities, if they were to apply for an artificial intelligence grant, would have to make sure that they are providing professional learning around how to safely and effectively use it. Have a proactive approach to teaching and mitigating inaccuracies that may come up, biases, inequalities, or any issues. And then we've drafted guidelines and usage agreements that they would have to agree upon before they were actually given the funding for a grant that would include artificial intelligence. And that would include vendor-specific requirements, so making sure that we're meeting COPA, SIPA, FERPA, IDA, and Section 504 to make sure that we are keeping everybody safe and have the best interest of all of our students. We have also added an entire rubric section in our DLI grant, which is already a very, very lengthy rubric for our Tier 1 and Tier 2. So if a grant does happen to include AI, they would also have to go through that rubric and be cross-referenced and graded on the grant that they wrote to ensure that we are doing our due diligence to keep our students safe. The future status, so as you can see, in 2022, we started with our impact grants, and those run in a 3-year cycle. So right now we have 2 of them that are running. So we have two cohorts of 3 school districts that are running, and we're hoping to open that up again. So that would give us the potential to have 9 digital learning impact grants running, as well as up to 20 emerging technology grants running, and that would just be dependent on funding and the ask from each individual school in the RFP. About 3 years ago, we started doing really intensive professional development around enhancing the grant writing process, and we have seen as a result a massive transformation in how well these grants have been written and everything that has really, in all of the scoring and everything else that has come out of them. And so we are going to continue to do that by offering professional learning opportunities for folks out in the field, as well as offering some individual support for charter schools as well. And like we always say every year, we are really, really proud to share this map with you all. We are really proud of the spread that we have across the state of North Carolina and the impact that it has on students across the state. And so we are continuing to ensure that we are providing digital learning initiative grants to all regions of the state to ensure equitable access for all. And in front of you, we have a tentative timeline, which shows that we will open the RFP if it is approved on December 7th. Grants will be due on March 4th. We have a lot of webinars in there to support, and then we'll start our Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 process, and then hopefully come back to the board on June 1st with some great DLI grantees that we would be privileged to award some funds to.
Thank you. And again, our vote here will be to authorize the request for proposals to be issued with respect to these digital learning grants. And we will then revisit in June once we have all the information about the proposed grants. Are there questions or comments about this particular proposal? There's a footnote, and I'm going to say this inarticulately and probably not of any value. We may want to look at some point in terms of how we deal with generative AI within the various school systems. I know some school systems are already grappling with some of that, and I don't know if it's even a state level issue, but at some point it is something that we need to give some careful consideration of, because it does already exist, and I appreciate the sensitivity that you've talked about in terms of how it would be dealt with here.
Yeah, so in regards to AI, as we're across the state, we are seeing some policies that are being put into place, and most of them are around citing sources. So if students or teachers are using artificial intelligence, they're citing it to ensure that we know where the information's coming from. As I was reviewing, I looked through Oregon and California's state board policy. They're the only 2 that are currently published at a state level, as well as the draft guidelines that Dr. Wren and her team are working on for AI as I was building the guidelines around the DLI grant. So I'm sure Dr. Wren can speak more to that.
Yeah,
I'll be glad to speak
Yeah,
to that.
please do, because we have this already.
USED released AI guidance 4 weeks ago. The issue is our schools are out there using it already. So we are playing catch up a bit, if you will. We have drafted guidance that come out from our agency on how to safely use it, but also not just for safety and data privacy, the sheer benefits to pedagogy. It's somewhat getting ignored in the safety and in the plagiarism. Tremendous benefits. So we want to highlight that as well as the ongoing safety. So we've aligned with USED. I will also say our state CIO has said that he is going to release some state guidance to come around AI and how we use that in the state. And certainly if that impacts K-12, we will take that and put that into our guidance as it is. But however, we're at a point where we need to stare something out because it's already out there, it's already being used. It's a fantastic educational tool. And, but to be able to teach our educators on how to really embrace that, how to impact student outcomes, I think it's the one thing I've been very excited about because it is one way we can truly provide almost a personal tutor to every student in the state at no cost. So being able to harness that power is tremendous. And so we will have guidance that is actually almost in its final draft, 100% aligned with what USED has put out. We have taken it and moved it more to the classroom level and brought it down from a very high journal level. So it's something teachers can actually operationalize. So that is out there and it is getting ready to be released.
I'm happy to hear that we are aware that we need to catch up in terms of policies, especially at K-12, but probably also all the way through the university level. It's amazing how major research papers and dissertations are now being written. And it's really getting into the realm of ethics. So we really do have to get this one under control.
Dr. Moore?
Just a quick technical note. I think we have 2 copies of the RFP in our materials, and one of them has a header that says request for proposals December 2024 at the top. Is that 2023?
It should be, yes, thank you. And there should be 2 RFPs, one for emerging technologies
That
and
doesn't
one
matter.
for the impact grant. Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think we will look forward to updates on where the AI policies are falling. It is a very important issue. In my profession, 2 lawyers from New York no longer have a license because they used AI to do a brief that did not go well for them. Let's move to Biz Op 4, which is an item that cropped up in the budget that I don't think the department was in any way aware of was coming. We all know there were a few of those items, and this is another one of those. It's a report that the General Assembly has asked for the study, status, and cost of carbon monoxide and radon gas testing in schools. Nathan Mon has started this project and can report on where we are in terms of the timing of the requested report and our ability to respond to it from a timing standpoint as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, the recent state budget directed this board to study the status and cost of carbon monoxide detection systems and alarms in K-12 schools, as well as the status and cost of radon gas testing in schools across the state. Don't have slides today, but there is a shell report in your materials, which is provided in an effort to meet the deadline of December 15th to report to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. We anticipate a full report being available in time for your March meeting. We're surveying what is defined in the budget, in the law, as identified public schools. And there is a table in this draft report, this preliminary report that lists those school entities from PSUs to laboratory schools, the schools of science and math, both campuses, the School for the Arts, UNC School of the Arts, as well as regional schools, the Northeast Regional School in particular, juvenile schools operated by Department of Public Safety, DHHS schools, as well as the schools for the deaf and blind, that are DPI K-12 schools. So that list is there. As you can see, it encompasses well over 2,500 school campuses. Each respondent is asked to provide 6 answers for each campus to get at the core, the thrust of the survey, which is how many buildings are in various different statuses related to these 2 areas. So that, 6 times 2,500 exceeds 15,000 data points, and we're well on our way to collecting that information. The analysis will take more time than we've had to date, and then we expect to be able to report in some way the a cost order of magnitude for, again, bringing any existing facility into compliance with current codes, building and fire codes, should that requirement be passed into law. I think that's sort of the hypothetical behind this survey. So we look forward to presenting that in greater detail when we are able to do so.
To add a multiplier to that of 15,000, many of those campuses actually have multiple buildings, so it's actually 15,000 times another multiplier.
Yeah.
So it's probably well above, well, in the vicinity of 50,000 type separate.
But in the 15,000 plus, those are data points within that this survey will produce for us. We, whether it's 0 or 1 or 7, what have you.
Yeah, but
so
the school that has 7 buildings
yeah.
on the campus may have 7 very different situations with respect
That's
to
right.
carbon monoxide and the radon detection. So it's
And then, yes, where those systems are required is defined in code, and there are some exceptions and so forth. So that's the reason for the 6 questions that you see, because we're getting at, how many buildings these systems might need to be provided in should that law change.
So just becoming aware of this in October, the department's already gone to work in a significant way trying to gather the information. But the information gathering is still in process. So what we would be voting on here is simply the word's been used, shell report, a report that says what we're doing and describes what the task will be, and forecasts a timing of somewhere more around March for a full report with the full analysis, which can't even begin until you get all the background information. There has been some indication that certainly if it's a budget item for the next session, if we could get it by March, that might be important in terms of timing to get the analysis information there. So that's about as fast as it can be done, and that's what the department's working very hard to do, and we thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Dr.
Just a quick clarification. We're approving the draft as submitted with blank pages that have not yet been collected, information has not yet been collected, for the purposes of staff continuing to gather the data for the final report due to legislators in March.
It's actually due December 15th, but there's no way it can possibly be
So-
done
so
by
we're-
then. So we're
got it.
we're doing a stopgap measure to show what's being done,
Got it.
and then promising, March, which is an important time marker to try to have a very full analysis.
Appreciate that.
Hopefully that's helpful. And then that's really under the time constraints the best we can do.
And we had asked respondents to submit, complete the survey by December 1, and we had good response, but responses are still coming in, of course, and we
Not
haven't
shockingly,
haven't cut it
follow-up
off for
required.
anyone. It was a difficult period to be conducting a statewide survey.
Yes.
When did you send it out? Because this might have been one of the last ones I saw, and I thought this will be fun.
It was in November. We had to develop the survey before we could issue it, so.
Well, we appreciate all the work that's going into this, and the topic is important, and so we appreciate the fact that you're taking it very seriously and will undertake the analysis, and look forward to hearing the report in March.
Okay.
If not before, but probably
Sure.
it's going to be March. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to BizOp 5, which is a 21st Century Grant Appeal for Maggie's Outreach, which is in Hope County. And like my colleague Blackburn earlier, I'm going to read, if I can, the recommendation that resulted from the appeal before a panel of State Board of Education that took place on December the 5th. And so I'm going to read the proposed recommendation for the board's consideration at this point. This matter came before a panel of the State Board of Education for a hearing on December 5, 2023. The matter to be considered was the recommended termination of 3 separate federal 21st Century Community Learning Center grants, which were awarded to Maggie's Outreach Youth Enrichment Center to provide after-school weekend and summer programming for at-risk students in Hope County. Before the panel for consideration is the November 4th, 2023 recommended decision of hearing officer David Hostetler. The board panel included State Board of Education members Alan Duncan, panel chair, and John Blackburn and Wendell Hall. At issue are 3 separate 3-year grants awarded to Maggie's Outreach. 1, a cohort 14 grant, which began in the summer of 2020 and ended September 30, 2023. 2, a cohort 15 grant, which began in the summer of 2021 and is scheduled to end September 30, 2024. And 3, a cohort 16 grant, which began in the summer of 2022 and is scheduled to end September 30, 2025. The primary reason for the recommended closure was the failure by Maggie's Outreach to meet minimum required student attendance levels in each of the cohorts. Specifically, at the time DPI did a review of the program in January of 2023, the minimum attendance rate was 70% of enrolled students. Cohort 14 was only at 40%, which was 42 of 105 students. Cohort 15 was at 61.3%, which was 49 of 80 students. And cohort 16 was at 4%, which was 2 of 50 students. It was admitted by all parties that the numbers were below the minimum requirements. The hearing officer recommended that cohorts 14 and 15 remain open and receive other lesser sanctions. With regard to cohort 16, the hearing officer acknowledged that the attendance rate was excessively low and recommended that termination may be reasonable following written warnings, technical assistance, and action planning. Following the hearing and the consideration of new and updated information, the panel voted unanimously to recommend to the State Board that it modify the hearing officer's decision. Specifically, a motion was passed unanimously by the panel to recommend to the State Board that it find the following. 1, the appeal by Maggie's Outreach as to the termination of its cohort 14 grant is moot because it terminated on September 30, 2023, and all funds have been paid to the Maggie's Outreach that it was owed. 2, the appeal by Maggie's Outreach as to the termination of its cohort 15 grant, which will terminate on September 30, 2024, is sustained, and the hearing officer's decision is upheld to allow the program to continue in operation with the conditions that it be offered and accept technical assistance from NCDPI, and that it continue to make sustained efforts to attain and maintain at least a 70% attendance rate. 3, the appeal by Maggie's Outreach as to the termination of its cohort 16 grant is denied due to the excessively low attendance rate the parties admit has plagued this high school cohort. The board panel inquired about current attendance rates for cohort 16. Almost 11 months after the NCDPI began a move to revoke the cohort 16 grant, the number of students enrolled in the cohort is in the 20 to 25 student range, half of the required 50 student enrollment minimum. The panel specifically found Maggie's Outreach has had an additional 11 months from when it was first warned that it would be closed to increase its enrollment and has still been unable to do so. Additional coaching, warnings, or other possible interventions by NCDPI would reasonably appear to be futile at this time. The panel could not justify the expenditure of hundreds of thousands of dollars of federal money to serve so few students. And that's the recommendation. Glad to have any questions. Glad, Mr. Blackmore, Mr. Hall, would you like to add anything to what's been read? All right. Anyone have any questions or comments? This will be on the agenda for vote tomorrow. We'll now go on to Biz Op 6, which is the Nash-Edgecombe demerger plan. And this is now we're now in discussion items, and we have Luke here to report on this. I was expecting Allison Schaefer, so welcome, Luke.
Look a little bit different, a little uglier than Allison, but I'll try my best. Good afternoon, everyone. Just want to take a brief moment to update you all on the Nash and Edgecombe demerger plan. As you probably are aware, there was some legislation in June passed that the current parts of Edgecombe that are being served by Nash will now be what's Nash's will be Nash's, and what is Edgecombe's will be Edgecombe's. So as part of that transition, the legislation required a written plan of transfer decided on between the two boards of education as well as the Board of County Commissioners. And as part of that, they had to submit their plan by November 15th of this year. Happy to report, and has been passed along to you all, they did turn that in. If they had not turned that in, then the board would have needed to write their plan of transfer for them. And as part of that, with the legislation, we have not heard any issues, nor have we found anything wrong with the plan or heard from either board that anything else needs to be done. There was some new information presented recently regarding the federal asset transfer. Originally, they were thinking it was going to have to be treated under federal regulation as a disposition. However, given the unique circumstances, the U.S. Department of Ed has reconsidered that, and they will not treat it as a disposition, such that Edgecombe will not have to pay Nash for those federal assets. So Allison and I that was information presented to them after the plan was submitted to us. Allison and I had a meeting with them last week to discuss that. Both parties seemed in agreement with that, and we are just awaiting written confirmation of that agreement. So, and that was within their written plan of transfer. That was there was flexibility within that. So, with that, no action for the board to take at this moment. Should anything come up, there may need to be a special meeting potentially, but we don't foresee that happening. So, with that, happy to take any questions.
So to be clear, it should be no action by the board unless a problem comes up that at this point is not foreseen.
That is correct.
The parties have worked apparently well together through a difficult situation to be able to present an agreed upon document and to work through the issues. So,
Yes, sir.
any questions or comments on this? I think we should all be thankful the parties have done that good work, because it would not have been a great job. It would not have been an easy job for the board to deal with that. So. That then moves us to Biz Op 7, and Biz Op 7 and 8 are important discussion items. Biz Op 7 is reports to the North Carolina General Assembly about the weighted funding for exceptional children and students. Dr. Carol Ann Hudgens is here along with Jennifer Bennett. This brings together the combined efforts of our exceptional children department as well as our Office of School Business Services. So welcome to each of you. Let's start on Biz Op 7, and then we'll go to Biz Op 8, the same team.
Thank you, and good afternoon, board members and advisors. This presentation summarizes the ongoing collaboration of the NCDPI and its stakeholders to develop a proposed funding model based on services provided for exceptional children in response to the legislative reporting requirements in Session Law 2023-134. In order to develop a weighted model based on services provided to students with disabilities, three major factors have served as a guide to further define unique service variables associated with individualized education programs. Next slide, please. Those variables are educational environments, levels of services and supports, and personnel. As depicted in this slide, regular, resource, and separate represent the federal reporting categories for educational environments. Generally, in each of those environments, the intensity of services increases from left to right. As the levels of services and supports increase in intensity, the number and specialty areas of personnel required to provide services often also increase and diversify. The three factors just described are data collected in the Every Child Accountability System, if you'll go to the next slide, and are based on the federal headcount collected and submitted to the Office of Special Education Programs in December annually. The model recently tested with 36 public school units used December 2022 headcount. At this time, I'm going to transition to Jennifer Bennett, Senior Director of School Business Services. Our office have worked closely together on all aspects of this model, and she will provide additional details about existing funding streams for exceptional children, additional details from our work with stakeholders, and the proposed next steps.
Good afternoon. Right now, you'll see in your report, we don't really have any numbers included in there as we are continuing to cost out and develop the model based on the feedback from the stakeholders. We've had a lot of interest. We've had a lot of concentrated feedback from everybody. Right now, the basics of the formula are to take the data directly from ECATS based on the head count and the service delivery. We've translated that into a metric that then gets the staffing first for the settings based on that separate resource intensive needs. There are very different national averages required for those staffing resources, from 1 to 25 for resource versus 1 to 8, 1 to 6 for the intensive needs, plus how many assistants are required when you start adding into those higher level services. We're also factoring in what may be needed for extra supplies and materials, especially in those separate settings for these students. We then take those same ECAT data, apply the related services that are required. So does that student in the resource setting actually then get speech services, speech and OT services? Maybe they get 3 or more related services in addition to that basic setting. So we're applying those factors in. We've applied a metric to allow for the concentration of contracted services that are out there. So, and that's a key feedback element that we're trying to gather from everybody, is what is that true percentage of contracted services for each of those groups, as well as the additional cost for that compared to a staff member. So we have metrics in there and measurements to allow us to is it 30% over the salary? Is it 45%? Are they contracting for 15 or 20? So we're looking at all these weights. We're also looking at how we can ensure there's a baseline for everybody so everybody can continue to meet federal effort and we don't run into situations. We are being very diligent and very careful with how we cost this out and taking all that into consideration. We're in fact meeting Friday with the Sandhills region. They've been very attuned and helpful in this, from the superintendents to their EC directors and finance officers, as well as our other people. So our next steps is to get our current ECATS data. So we want to align this with ECATS and the December data because that's what we use for federal funding. It's a very standard thing and it has all the details we need. So we're looking to get that data. It will be available and vetted to us by the end of December. And so the month of January we'll be applying a lot more of our costing metrics, and our hope is to have the report to the board at the beginning of February so that we have it by the February 15th over to the General Assembly for the budget cycle for both the Office of State Budget Management and the General Assembly. So we'll submit a tentative report that says this is where we're at for that January 15th due date, but we'll present the final model to you for action at the February board meeting.
All right, so this is a discussion item now because we'll have, what'll be more than just the shell report we've talked about earlier. It'll be a good deal of information to report in January 15th by that deadline, but not all of it because we'll still be working through the financial information and gathering that data. And I think it's important to point out, this is very important. We've known this was coming for a while, so we've been working on it. This is not quite like coming out of the budget. We didn't see that, on the horizon in any way. But
we have been working on it for a while, and we've been in discussions with our group since July, actively going around the state jointly to discuss with the different cohorts.
The reason it's particularly important is there can be a lot of money involved here if you make a misalignment of some sort. some of our EC students require not nearly as much service as some of our other EC students who require an extraordinary amount of service. And so working through this is important so that we don't want to miss the mark, which could be in either direction, which could be detrimental. And so I think we should all express appreciation for the hard work that's going into this and support for the difficulty of the task, because it really is a difficult task to work this through. But General Assembly seems quite committed to knowing this information, so we want to get it as accurately as we possibly can.
Yes, they are very committed, and it has been discussed for well over 7-8 years. So we want to make sure we're giving it the care and dedication it deserves.
Any questions or, yes, Ms. Camden?
I would just comment that thank you all for the work on this, and have confidence in you and your teams that you're going to get this right. But getting it right and then having the General Assembly act on it is going to be a game changer in the world of PC education. I think. I mean, we've been hearing for so many years how badly the current system serves the needs of kids and districts, but that means kids. So thank you for this work.
Sure, one of the best feedback things we're getting from this is it actually is helping the dialogue between EC departments and finance, and it provides a very good tool for even setting up the overall budget within a district. And so regardless, we're going to wind up with a tool that PSUs can use to set that up. So it's good work.
Dr. Moore?
Two quick thoughts. The first is, in the report it indicated that you're not really factoring in costs at central services. But in some districts, I believe you have central services staff that are providing, they're assigned to central services, but they're providing direct services to students. So how do you capture that?
Well, the direct services to students would be in the ECATS data that would come across to us.
So I'll elaborate a little bit more. On the services page of the IEP is where it notes the intensity of the services, and through that it looks at how many staff are required to deliver that cumulative services. So indirectly, it wouldn't be serving or wouldn't be earmarked for central office staff, but yet it would yield funding for enough personnel based on the services.
It's just captured by looking specifically.
Yes.
Wherever they're assigned, wherever the staff are.
Yes.
Okay. And then as you build this model, there are no dollars or anything anywhere at this point, and there's no assumption that you're building it within the total funding currently allocated, but rather irrespective of that.
So I'll start. We had some feedback since we have really just been working with our stakeholders right up to the line. We do have some feedback that we need to attend to that wasn't quite ready for discussion today that involves some of those variables that you just asked about.
I think the question is the size of the pie correct versus slicing it up differently?
May I?
Superintendent.
Thank you. It's not, because we tossed this out last session, knowing that there was interest in, I believe, the Senate side of the legislature about this, and I believe it was going to be a $60 million price tag to write the size of the pie.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? All right, so we'll hear again in January for the next level report, and then again in February. And we look forward to that because these are important discussions. We're going to move on to the same group for BizOp 8, and this is a little different than BizOp 7 in the sense that we didn't know this one was coming the same way we did with BizOp 7. So, Dr. Hudgens, can you fill us in on what's being requested here?
So this is a new opportunity that was included in House Bill 259, enacted on October 3rd, with a report due to the General Assembly on January 15th of 24. The goal of the study is to improve public school unit placement options in private schools with programs approved to provide services for students with disabilities. There are 10 study requirements that range from the potential need to initiate and implement new practices and procedures, review existing and explore new funding mechanisms, and ensure the placements of students with disabilities occur in compliance with federal requirements. In preparing to fulfill the legislative reporting requirements, the initial report submitted for discussion today includes the information we currently have available. The Office of Exceptional Children does have a process to approve non-public schools who voluntarily seek to have their programs approved to provide services for children with disabilities. If you'll go to the next slide for me. There are existing structures in place to monitor over-identification and placement of students with intensive needs, as well as a number of federal regulations that provide the guardrails for carefully considering how services are delivered. These existing structures serve as a starting point for framing and conducting the required study. Based on our December 22 child count data, approximately 139 students were placed in private schools by public school units in order to provide special education services. Given the complexity of the requirements and the time available between October 3rd and the due date of January 15th, I'd like to propose that the current report provided for discussion today be submitted to the General Assembly, acknowledging what we currently know about the variables with an amended timeline in which to fully conduct the study and report our findings. The amended timeline proposes that the study be fully initiated in early 24 with an updated report to the State Board of Education for discussion in the fall of 24 and submission in January of 25 with a complete report.
All right, so that, you have a description of the problem and the issues, and the work that's already being done, and a proposed timeline that Dr. Hutchins, I think, is saying is the one that can reasonably be met with complete information on, again, a very important topic. Questions or comments on this? All right, so we're not voting on anything on this today, but we will in January, so we'll be back then. Is that correct? Is that the timing? When do we need to make a report, an initial report?
So it's for discussion. We'll bring it back in January for you to approve this preliminary report
Okay.
and provide that on January 15th, provided there's no problems.
That's what I thought. Thank you
Okay.
for confirming that. All right, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please thank your colleagues for all the work for our special needs students. Our final areas are updates on contracts, both executed and planned. I have not heard any questions about those. They've been out for reviews. Anyone have any questions? Not hearing any. We also have the budget report, monthly budget report. Have not heard any questions about that. Are there any? Alexis Schaus has promised us a report in January with respect to where we are with ESSER funding, another update on that. So look forward to that next month. And with that, we are completed our work. Thank you, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. This concludes our discussions for today. I now request a motion to go into closed session.
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11A1, 3, and 6, and to prevent the disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Sections 115C-319 and 321, and 132-6.1C et sec. To consider the qualifications, competence, performance, or condition of appointment of public officers or employees or prospective public officers or employees, and to consult with our attorneys in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorneys and the public body, including a discussion of the following pending cases: Phillips versus NCDPI, Henderson versus North Carolina State Board of Education and NCDPI, Messick versus North Carolina State Board of Education, and AB by RB and CB versus North Carolina School for the Deaf.
Motion by Vice Chair Duncan. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Keenan. Mr. Fafaria, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Camden?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Mr. Blackburn,
Yes.
Ms. Moore, Treasurer Falwell, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes, motion carries, so we will not be returning for open session after this closed session, but we will recess until tomorrow, Thursday, December 7th at 9 a.m. See you then. Let's be in closed session at 4:40.
Think back about last night. I'm thinking about